She lifted her wine glass like Imani wasn't even worth standing up for. 7 months pregnant, standing in the doorway of her own bedroom, and Yoon Sarah didn't flinch, didn't cover herself, didn't drop her eyes. She just looked at Imani the way someone looks at a stranger who wandered into the wrong building, mild, almost bored, and said the words that would take years to stop echoing. Women like you were never meant to stand next to men like him. Not a scream, not a defense, a verdict. And Kang Tae-jun, the man who controlled half the port logistics on the Pacific Northwest, who could make city officials return calls in under 4 minutes, who had once told Imani she was the only thing in his life he hadn't had to negotiate for, stood there and said nothing fast enough. If you have ever loved someone so completely that you stopped keeping score and then found out the ledger had been running without you the whole time, stay with us. This story is going to go places you won't see coming. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and turn on notifications. We release stories that don't let you sleep until you know how they end. Hit the like button and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning of the night Imani Brooks walked out of an empire she had quietly held together for 3 years and never once looked back to see if it was still standing. The phone had been sitting on the kitchen counter the whole time. That was the part Imani would replay later, not the image she walked into, not Sarah's face, not Tae-jun's voice catching on her name like a man grabbing at something already falling. The part her mind kept returning to, in the weeks after, was the phone. How it had been right there on the granite counter, perfectly positioned, face up, like someone had set it there deliberately. But that thought belonged to later. Right now, at 8:43 on a Tuesday night in October, Imani Brooks was just a woman who had left her phone at home and turned her car around. She had only driven 4 blocks when she realized she was on her way to the quarterly meeting for the Eastside Children's Literacy Foundation, the one she had built from a borrowed conference room and a contact list of 11 people into an operation that served over 300 families. She was 20 minutes early, which was the only reason turning back felt worth it. The phone held her presentation notes, her board member contacts, her backup files. It wasn't optional. The penthouse elevator required her keycard and a 4-digit code. The lobby staff knew her face. Nobody stopped her, because nobody had any reason to. This was her home. The elevator opened directly into the foyer. She heard music first, something low and Korean, instrumental, the kind Tae-jun played when he wasn't working. Then laughter. A woman's laughter, bright and unhurried, the sound of someone completely at ease in a space. Imani's first thought was not suspicion. Her first thought was confusion. Tae-jun had told her he had back-to-back calls until midnight. He had kissed her temple that morning and told her not to wait up. She had nodded and packed her presentation bag and made herself a cup of ginger tea for the drive. She followed the sound the way you follow something that doesn't make sense yet. Not afraid, not braced, just trying to locate the information that would explain it. The bedroom door was half open. She pushed it the rest of the way. Yoon Sarah looked up first. Imani had met Sarah exactly 9 times. She had been Tae-jun's executive assistant for 14 months. Efficient, impeccably dressed, fluent in 3 languages, and so professionally measured in every interaction that Imani had once told Simone she seemed more like a feature of the office than a person. She had never felt threatened by Sarah. She had felt nothing about Sarah except the vague background certainty that the woman was very good at her job. Now Sarah was sitting up slowly, the white sheet pooled at her waist, and she was not panicking. That was what hit Imani first, before the full picture even assembled itself in her mind, before her body understood what her eyes were recording. Sarah wasn't scrambling, wasn't pulling the sheet higher, wasn't looking at Tae-jun for rescue or direction. She reached sideways to the nightstand, picked up the wine glass that was sitting there, her wine glass, in Imani's bedroom, on Imani's nightstand, and she looked directly at Imani, not at the floor, not at Tae-jun, at Imani. And she tilted the glass slightly, like she was offering a toast to something she had already decided. Tae-jun was already moving, already saying her name. Imani? She didn't hear the rest of it, not because the room went quiet, but because something in her went quiet. A switch she hadn't known existed, somewhere behind her sternum, just clicked off. She looked at him. Tae-jun Kang, 36 years old, the most controlled man she had ever known, standing in their bedroom in the half-dark with his dress shirt half open and an expression on his face that she had never seen before. Not guilt exactly, but something rawer than guilt. Something that looked like a man watching something he genuinely valued fall off a ledge and realizing too late that he had been the one who moved it there. "Don't," she said. Her voice surprised her. It was completely level. He stopped moving. Then Sarah spoke. The words were quiet, precise, delivered the way a professional delivers a message they have been paid to carry, not in anger, not in triumph, but with the calm of someone stating a fact they consider self-evident. "Women like you," Sarah said, "who spend their lives on other people's children instead of building something of their own, you were never meant to stand next to men like him. You know that. He knows it. He just needed longer to admit it." Imani's hand moved to her stomach. An automatic gesture, the kind her body made 100 times a day without instruction. The low, gentle press that meant, "I know you're there. We're still here." And she felt the baby shift. 7 months and 2 weeks. She was showing enough that no one in this room could pretend that detail was invisible. Sarah's eyes tracked the gesture. Something moved across her face, the first real thing Imani had seen there, and then it was gone. "Imani," Tae-jun's voice, different now. Stripped of the professional control, the boardroom register, every layer that usually sat between him and raw feeling. "Please don't leave." She walked to the kitchen. She picked up her phone. She pressed the elevator button. Tae-jun came after her. I was still talking. She could hear the cadence of it, the urgency. Her name surfacing every few sentences like something trying to stay above water. She did not turn around. The elevator doors opened and she stepped inside and she turned to face forward, because she had always been the kind of woman who faces forward, and she watched his face through the narrowing gap. He had one hand raised toward the door that was already closing. The last thing she saw before the doors met was his hand dropping. She exhaled, and then she drove into the rain. Seattle in October is not dramatic about its weather. It doesn't storm the way cities and movies do. No thunder, no cinematic downpour. It just rains steady and gray and without apology, and everything gets wet slowly, which is somehow worse. Imani drove for 11 minutes before she realized she had no idea where she was going. The Literacy Foundation meeting. She should go. She had notes to present and a budget proposal and 3 board members who were only there because she had personally called each of them and asked them to come. Her phone was in her hand. She could call the co-chair, make an excuse, redirect. She pulled over instead. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this the way she noticed everything right now. From a slight distance, as though she were watching herself through glass. Her hands were shaking and her jaw was tight, and the baby was moving in that slow, rolling way that happened when Imani held her breath without realizing it, so she made herself breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the technique she had learned from the prenatal instructor who said, anxiety is just the body preparing for something. The problem is when the body can't stop preparing. She thought about calling her mother and immediately knew she couldn't. Her mother would cry. Then she would start asking what Imani had done wrong, not out of cruelty. Out of the particular generational conviction that a marriage only broke when both people let it. Imani didn't have the bandwidth for that tonight. She thought about calling her closest friend Deja, who would be furious on her behalf in exactly the right way, but who also had 2 kids under 4 and worked night shifts at the hospital and didn't need this at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday. That left Simone, Dr. Imani Brooks. 41 years old, family law attorney. The kind of woman who could read a room and a contract and a person's real intentions all at the same time and have opinions about all 3 before you finished your sentence. Also, Imani's older sister. Also, the person who had looked Tae-jun Kang in the eye at their engagement dinner and said, with complete pleasantness, "I hope you understand what you're asking her to give up." They had barely spoken in 7 months. The distance had started small. A disagreement about the prenatal care team, which Tae-jun had arranged entirely through his private medical contacts, and which Simone had found troubling in ways she listed with the specificity of a legal brief. Then it expanded into something bigger and vaguer and more honest, which was that Simone didn't trust the life Imani was living, didn't trust the man at the center of it, and had said so one too many times. Imani had told her she needed support, not a prosecution. Simone had said sometimes support looks like telling the truth. They had not found the resolution to that conversation. Imani sat in her car in the rain for 4 minutes. Then she typed the address she still knew by heart into the navigation and pulled back onto the road. Simone's house was in Madison Valley, a 2-story craftsman, dark green, with a porch light that Simone always left on when she was home, because their mother had always left a porch light on, and some things you carry forward without deciding to. Imani rang the bell. She heard movement inside, quick, assured footsteps. And then the porch light brightened as the door opened and Simone was there, in her reading glasses and a Howard sweatshirt, with a case file in one hand and the expression of a woman who had been mid-thought. She looked at Imani, the wet coat, the carefully blank face, the hand resting over her stomach. Simone didn't ask what happened. She didn't say I knew it. She didn't reach for her phone to call anyone. She simply stepped back from the doorway and said, "Come inside." That was the thing about Simone that Imani always forgot when they were fighting and remembered completely the moment she stopped. She could read a situation. She knew when a person needed to be questioned and when they needed to be let in out of the rain. Imani stepped inside. Simone took her wet coat and hung it on the hook by the door that Imani had always used as a child whenever she came home from anywhere drenched, because Seattle children don't bother with umbrellas. Then Simone went to the kitchen. She didn't ask. She came back with a mug of hot tea. The ginger and lemon kind, the kind Imani had been drinking throughout the pregnancy, and set it on the coffee table in front of the couch where Imani had already lowered herself down. Imani sat with both hands wrapped around the mug. "I found him with Sarah," she said. Simone sat across from her. She had set the case file down somewhere and removed her reading glasses. She was fully present in the way she became fully present in crisis. Still, focused, her whole attention pointed in one direction. She said nothing. She waited. "In our bedroom," Imani added. "I went back for my phone. It was on the kitchen counter. I don't—" She stopped. Something was tugging at the edge of that sentence, something she didn't have the language for yet. "I don't remember leaving it there." Simone was watching her. "She looked right at me," Imani said. "Sarah." She just picked up her wine glass and looked at me like she had been expecting me. A pause. "Then she told me women like me were never built for men like Tae-jun." The room was quiet for a moment. "What did he do?" Simone asked. "He tried to stop me from leaving." "Did he touch you?" "No." Imani shook her head. "He just kept saying my name. I don't think he knew what else to say." Simone nodded slowly. She reached forward and picked up her own tea, and she held it without drinking it, which meant she was thinking hard and choosing her next words with the care she always used when the stakes were high. "What do you need from me tonight?" she asked. Not, "What are you going to do?" Not, "Here's what you should do." Not, "I told you." Just, "What do you need?" "I need to not go home," Imani said. "Okay." "I need—" Her voice cracked once, a small fracture, before she steadied it. "I need to think, clearly, without anyone making decisions around me that I don't know about." Simone's eyes sharpened at that, at the specific shape of that sentence. But she didn't chase it. Not yet. "You have the room upstairs," Simone said. "It still has your stuff in the closet. I never cleared it out." Imani looked at her. "I was being optimistic," Simone said, with the particular flat delivery that meant she was telling the truth and knew it was a little embarrassing. The tension in Imani's chest shifted. Not gone, nothing was gone, but rearranged into something she could breathe around. She slept in her sister's spare room that night, and sometime around 2 in the morning she made the decision that had been assembling itself beneath every other thought all evening. She was not going back to the penthouse. She was not going back to the marriage. She was not going to let the full weight of Tae-jun's world, the power, the resources, the carefully arranged version of love that came with its own architecture of control, determine what happened next. She was 30 years old and 7 months pregnant, and she was still the person who had built something from nothing in a borrowed conference room with 11 names on a list. She was not finished building. She pressed her hand to her stomach in the dark. "I've got us," she said quietly. The baby moved. That was enough. What Imani didn't know, what she wouldn't know for weeks, was that by the time she pressed the elevator button in the penthouse, Tae-jun had already picked up his phone, not to call her, not to arrange a cover story. He called Park Min-jae, his most trusted lieutenant, the only person in his organization who knew everything and had never once sold a word of it. She left, Tae-jun said. Min-jae, who had worked for Tae-jun for 11 years and had never been surprised by anything that happened in the course of doing this work, was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Where's she going? I don't know yet. I need eyes on her, not surveillance, protection. Nobody follows her, nobody makes contact, nobody exists in her awareness. I just need to know she gets somewhere safe. Understood. Tae-jun hung up and stood in the middle of the penthouse kitchen for a long time. He did not pour a drink. He did not call anyone else. He stood in the kitchen where Imani's phone had been sitting on the counter. Imani's phone, which should have been in her bag, which she always kept in her bag. And he thought about the sound of the elevator doors closing. Then he thought about Sarah. He picked up a different phone, a clean one. He called a number that did not exist in any database connected to his name. It rang 4 times before anyone answered. Find Sarah, he said. She left the penthouse 20 minutes ago. I need to know where she goes and who she calls in the next 6 hours. The person on the other end asked no questions. Tae-jun set the phone down. He sat at the kitchen counter where his wife's phone had been, in the kitchen of the home she had left. And he understood with the particular clarity that comes only when something irreversible has already happened. He had not just lost her trust tonight. He had confirmed every fear she had never fully spoken aloud. He had shown her, in the most unambiguous way possible, that the life she had been building with him came with a foundation she had never seen. The worst part was not the guilt. The worst part was that something about tonight felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with the affair. Sarah had not panicked. She had been completely prepared, and Imani's phone had been sitting on the kitchen counter like someone had placed it there. Tae-jun sat with that thought for a long time. Outside, the Seattle rain kept falling, steady, gray, unhurried, over a city that did not know yet that it was about to become the center of something much larger and far more dangerous than a marriage falling apart. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Imani Brooks slept in her sister's spare room with one hand on her stomach and made herself the only promise that mattered. Whatever came next would be hers to decide. The morning after is never the hardest part. The hardest part is the third morning, when the shock has worn off enough that the real shape of things starts coming through, and you understand that this is not a bad night you are recovering from. This is the new geography of your life, and you are going to have to learn to navigate it without the map you spent 3 years memorizing. Imani woke at 5:47 on the third morning in Simone's spare room and lay still for a long moment, one hand on her stomach, listening to the rain. Then she sat up, put her feet on the floor, and went to make coffee because that was the thing she could do. And doing things she could do was how she intended to survive the things she couldn't control. Simone was already in the kitchen. This was not surprising. Simone had been in the legal profession for 15 years and had developed the sleeping schedule of someone who treated rest as a strategic resource, taken precisely and never wasted. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting that Imani could not read from across the room. "You should still be asleep," Simone said, without looking up. "So should you." "I'm working." "I noticed." Imani poured herself a mug, topped it with hot water the way she'd been doing since the first trimester when straight coffee stopped agreeing with her, and sat down across from her sister. "What are you working on?" Simone looked up then, just briefly. "Do you want me to answer that honestly?" Imani looked at the legal pad, at the way Simone's handwriting got smaller and tighter when she was thinking hard. "You're already building the case." "I'm doing preliminary research." "Simone." "You came to my house," Simone said. "I'm an attorney. This is what I do when someone I love walks into my house looking like that." She closed the laptop halfway. Not all the way, just enough to signal she was paying attention. "You don't have to do anything with it, but I'm not going to sit here and not be prepared." Imani wrapped both hands around her mug. The baby shifted. That slow internal movement that had become her most reliable constant over the past 7 weeks. She pressed her palm flat. "I want to file," she said. Simone was quiet. "Not out of anger," Imani continued. I'm past the anger part, I think. Or maybe I haven't reached it yet, I'm not sure. But I know what I decided the other night, and it hasn't changed. I want to file." "Okay," Simone said. "I want someone good, not just competent. Someone who has dealt with complex financial situations before." Someone who isn't going to look at the size of what Tae-jun controls and decide the case is too complicated to push. I know exactly who to call, Simone said. Graham Vance. He handled the Mercer dissolution 3 years ago. You probably remember it. It was in the papers. 38 million in contested assets, multinational business interests, and a husband who had 3 different attorneys trying to slow the process down simultaneously. Graham had it resolved in 8 months. Can he start this week? I'll call him at 8. Imani nodded. She looked down at her mug. Tae-jun has called 11 times. Simone said nothing. I haven't answered. I sent one text that said I was safe and that I needed space and that I would contact him through legal representation. A pause. He texted back a single word. What word? Okay. The kitchen was quiet for a moment, rain against the window, the refrigerator's low hum. That surprises you, Simone said. A little. Imani looked up. He's not a man who accepts things quietly. No, Simone agreed. He's not. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that a man like Tae-jun Kang going quiet was not necessarily a sign of submission. Sometimes it was a sign that he had simply shifted the problem to a different register, one that moved through channels that didn't announce themselves. Graham Vance arrived at Simone's office the following Monday with a leather portfolio, a firm handshake, and the particular energy of a man who had been in enough high-stakes rooms that nothing in them made him nervous anymore. He was 53, compact, with reading glasses he kept pushing up and a habit of writing things down by hand while you talked, which Imani found oddly reassuring. He asked her questions for 90 minutes straight. Not soft questions, not the kind designed to make her feel comfortable. The kind designed to locate exactly what the landscape looked like before the lawyers started moving things around. How much did you know about the specifics of his business operations? I knew the structure of the legitimate holdings, the logistics companies, the private equity arm, the clubs. I didn't ask questions about the rest. Did he ever tell you not to? No, he just never offered. Graham made a note. Joint accounts? 2. We kept separate accounts for personal spending, but the household expenses, the property, the foundation donations he made in our names, those ran through the joint accounts. The foundation donations. Graham looked up. Walk me through those. Imani explained the Literacy Foundation, the structure of it, the nonprofit status, the donor list. Graham listened and wrote, and when she finished, he said, was he involved in the foundation directly? He made donations. He attended 2 events. He never tried to influence programming or staffing. But he was a named donor. Yes. Graham nodded. He wrote something. Then he looked at her directly and said, Mrs. Kang, Brooks, Imani said. Imani Brooks. He registered that without comment and adjusted. Ms. Brooks, I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that the purpose of the question is not to assign blame, but to understand the full picture. In the last 12 months, did anything in your daily routine change without your having asked for the change? Routes you took? Appointments you attended? Services connected to your home or your personal safety? The question landed differently than she expected. She thought about it carefully. My prenatal care team changed. Tae-jun arranged a different specialist. He said the original one had a malpractice settlement in her history. I checked and it was true, so I didn't push back. Who arranged the new specialist? His office. Did you meet the specialist independently or through a referral from someone you chose? Through his office, Imani said, more slowly this time. Anything else? She thought about the car service. She had stopped driving herself to certain appointments around her 5th month. Tae-jun had said the parking around the clinic was dangerous, which it was, and had arranged a driver. She had thought nothing of it at the time. She said so. Graham wrote it all down. Then he said, I'm going to need full disclosure on his financial holdings. Everything the corporate filings show, which I already have, but also anything you observed that didn't show up in the filings. There's a lot that won't show up. I know. Tell me anyway. She told him what she knew. Not everything. There were things she genuinely didn't know, black spaces in her understanding of Tae-jun's world that she had chosen, at various points, not to illuminate because some part of her had understood that illuminating them would require her to make decisions she wasn't ready to make. She told Graham that too. She was not going to curate her account for appearances. He appreciated it. She could tell. When she was finished, he set down his pen and looked at her with the level steadiness of someone who had heard a lot of complicated things in a lot of difficult rooms. "There's something I want to show you," he said. "We found it in the preliminary financial review. I want to know if you knew about it." He turned a document toward her. She leaned forward and read it. Then she read it again. It was a trust. Established 8 months ago. The beneficiary was listed as a minor child, name currently designated only by initials. IBK Imani Brooks Kang. The trust held $7.4 million. Her daughter's initials. Her daughter, who had not been born yet. Who did not have a name yet. Not officially, because Imani and Tae-jun had agreed to wait and see her first. He had been building a financial future for their daughter without telling her. "I didn't know," she said. "I gathered," Graham said carefully. "We're still analyzing the structure, but there are elements of it that are unusual. The trust has provisions that restrict access in ways that go beyond standard protective clauses. There are security protocols written into the management terms. Security protocols. Asset protection measures, the kind used when there is a perceived threat to the beneficiary." The room felt very still. "He thought someone might come after her," Imani said. "It was not a question. That's what the documentation suggests." She called Tae-jun that evening. He picked up before the second ring. She could hear the particular quality of his silence, the focused, stripped-down attention that meant he was somewhere private and had been waiting. "You knew there was a threat," she said. He didn't deflect. She had always given him that. He didn't waste her time with deflections when she came at him directly. "Yes." "How long?" 7 months, maybe 8. "While I was pregnant." "Yes." "And you decided I didn't need to know about it." "I decided you didn't need to carry it." His voice was controlled, but the control was costing him something. "You were building the foundation. You were managing the pregnancy alone on the days I was working. You were already doing everything. I didn't want to—" "That's not your decision to make," she said. "Imani, it is not your decision," she said again, and her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. "A threat to my life and my child's life is not something you get to filter and manage on my behalf. I am not someone who works for you. I am not a situation you handle. I am your wife." She stopped, corrected herself. "I was your wife, and I deserved to know." The silence that followed lasted long enough that she checked the screen to confirm the call was still connected. "You're right," he said. She had expected argument. She had prepared for argument, had the next 4 points lined up and ready. His agreement hit her somewhere she hadn't braced. "I know that doesn't fix it," he added. "No, it doesn't. Is there anything—" "My attorney will be in contact with yours," she said. "Don't call me directly anymore. If there's something that concerns Amaya's safety, something I actually need to know, go through Graham Vance." She hung up. She sat on the edge of the spare bed in Simone's house, in the quiet, and understood for the first time with full clarity what Tae-jun had actually done. Not the affair. She was still processing the affair. That wound was still too fresh and strange to fully locate. But the other thing, the quieter thing. He had spent 8 months constructing a protective architecture around her life without ever asking her permission to enter it, changing her medical team, arranging her transportation, monitoring her movements, probably, in ways she was only beginning to identify, building financial structures around her unborn daughter that she had no knowledge of. All of it, he would say, out of love. All of it, she understood now, was also control. The scariest part was that the two things were not in conflict with each other. They were the same thing, wearing different clothes. Graham Vance called at 7:15 the next morning. "Sarah is gone," he said. Imani had been awake. She was standing at Simone's kitchen window watching the sky go pale. "What do you mean gone?" "She didn't show up at Tae-jun's offices yesterday. Her apartment has been vacated. No forwarding address, no notice given, no indication she planned to leave." A pause. "Her personal cell is going directly to voicemail." Imani felt a cold, specific sensation move through her. Not fear exactly, the predecessor to fear. "When did this happen?" "Based on the neighbor interviews my investigator ran this morning, sometime in the 48 hours after the incident at the penthouse." The incident. She noted the word choice without comment. "What does Tae-jun's office say?" "His HR department has indicated she was placed on administrative leave pending an internal review,
But the leave was filed the morning after you found them, which suggests he moved fast. Or someone else moved faster, she said. Graham was quiet for a moment. What makes you say that? She wasn't sure exactly. Something about Sarah's face in that bedroom, the preparedness of it, the complete absence of panic. A woman who had just been caught in a genuinely unplanned moment would have looked different. Sarah had looked like someone executing a step in a sequence. I don't know yet, Imani said, but I want you to find out where she went. We're looking, Graham said. There's something else. Tell me. The recruitment firm that placed Sarah with Tae-jun's corporation 14 months ago, it's a shell company. It traces through 3 holding entities before you reach anything real. My investigator is still unwinding the chain, but the early indicators suggest the origin capital came from a source connected to a Korean business conglomerate operating out of Portland and Vancouver. Imani pressed her hand flat against the cold window glass. The Bake Consortium, she said. She had heard the name exactly once, Tae-jun, on a phone call she was not supposed to overhear, 18 months ago, his voice carrying the specific flatness he used when discussing things he considered genuinely dangerous. You've heard of them, Graham said. Once, Tae-jun's voice when he mentioned them told me everything I needed to know. They are Kang's primary competitor and oldest enemy in the Pacific Northwest criminal infrastructure, Graham said, with the precise, bloodless delivery of a man reading from research rather than editorializing. Baek Do-hwan has been trying to dismantle Kang's organization for years through legal, financial, and extra-legal means. If Sarah was placed inside Kang's company through Bayek's financing, she was a plant, Imani said flatly. Possibly. Which means the affair... She stopped herself. She needed to think it through in order, not jump to the conclusion, because the conclusion was so large and so dark that if she arrived at it wrong, she would not know what to do with it. We don't know yet how voluntary her involvement was, Graham said carefully, or what she was specifically instructed to do. We know the placement was not accidental. Imani stood at the window and thought about Sarah lifting her wine glass with one hand and delivering a precisely calibrated sentence designed to destroy Imani's confidence in herself. We were never meant to stand next to men like him. Not screamed, not improvised, aimed. Someone needed me to leave, she said. Graham said nothing, which was the professional version of agreement. Someone needed me to leave and to believe it was my own decision. She felt the weight of it settling. They needed Tae-jun destabilized, a public scandal, his marriage destroyed, his focus pulled. She pressed her other hand to her stomach. And me out of the penthouse before... She stopped again. Before what? Graham asked. She didn't answer right away. She was thinking about the phone on the kitchen counter. She was thinking about how she had been certain she had packed it. How she was meticulous about her bag, had been since the pregnancy started, because she carried medical documentation and emergency contacts and her insurance information everywhere, because Tae-jun had asked her to. I need you to find out, she said, who had access to the penthouse that afternoon. Graham's voice shifted, subtle, but she caught it. You think someone was in there? I think my phone didn't walk itself to the kitchen counter, she said. And I think it's worth knowing who wanted me to come back to the penthouse at exactly that moment. There was a pause. When Graham spoke again, his voice carried the quality of a man recalibrating the scale of what he was dealing with. I'll have my investigator pull the building's security access logs. Do that, Imani said. And Graham? Yes. Don't tell Tae-jun what you're looking for. Not yet. The security logs took 4 days to obtain and 48 hours for Graham's investigator to analyze. When the results came back, Graham called Simone's office rather than Imani's cell, which meant he wanted to deliver the information in a controlled environment with another professional present. They sat across from him in Simone's conference room on a Thursday afternoon, the Seattle skyline gray and flat behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. Graham opened his portfolio and set a single printed page on the table between them. 3 people entered the penthouse between 1 and 3 in the afternoon on the day of the incident, he said. 2 of them were authorized, a member of Tae-jun's cleaning staff, and a regular maintenance contractor who services the building's internal systems. Both are verified. Both have clean histories in the building access records. He tapped the bottom of the page. The 3rd entry was made using a keycard registered to the building's facilities management office.
It's a master level card, meaning it doesn't appear in the standard resident access log. It runs through the building's operations system. Someone with knowledge of that system or access to someone who works within it could use it without triggering the standard security alerts. Imani looked at the entry time. 2:17 in the afternoon. She had left for the literacy meeting at 2:40. Whoever had been in the penthouse had been there 23 minutes before she walked out. They moved the phone, she said. We can't prove that from the logs alone, Graham said, but the timing is consistent with it. Can you trace who accessed the MasterCard? The card itself is assigned to the building's head of facilities. He's been interviewed. He has no recollection of lending it or losing it. The card access system shows it used in 2 other locations that afternoon before the penthouse entry, both routine service corridors. Someone either cloned it or borrowed it from someone with legitimate access. Simone had been silent through this. She spoke now. This is beyond a civil matter. Yes, Graham agreed. This is criminal conspiracy, at minimum. Possibly more, depending on what the original intent was regarding the pregnancy. Imani felt the sentence hit her like a hand to the sternum. They knew about the pregnancy. The trust Tae-jun built was not public knowledge, Graham said, but his organization had internal communications about it. If Sarah had access to internal communications, which an executive assistant would, she had access to the information about the baby. And if she was reporting to Baek Do-hwan's people, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Imani looked at the printed page on the table. At the timestamp, 2:17, someone had been in her home, had touched her things, had moved her phone from wherever she had left it to the kitchen counter, knowing she would come back for it, knowing what she would find, knowing that what she found would send her out the door and into the rain and keep her there. They had used her. The affair, Sarah's words, the phone on the counter, all of it assembled into a single design moment, a demolition scheduled in advance and executed with precision. And somewhere inside all of that, a man she had spent 3 years loving had handed his enemies the door by walking through one she should never have had to find. She sat in Simone's conference room with that understanding settling into her like concrete. Baek's people had built the trap. Tae-jun had chosen to walk into it. Both things were true. She was not going to let one excuse the other. I want to share this with the authorities, she said. Her voice was steady in a way that surprised her. Not the steadiness of calm, but the steadiness of someone who has moved past emotion into decision. Not through Tae-jun's channels, independent of him. Graham nodded. I have a contact at the FBI field office. Someone I've worked with before who handles organized crime-adjacent civil matters. I can make the introduction without it appearing connected to Kang's organization. Do it, Imani said. Simone was watching her with an expression that Imani recognized. It was the expression Simone wore when she was revising her understanding of something, recalibrating. What? Imani asked. Nothing, Simone said. Then, you're handling this better than I expected. I'm not handling it well, Imani said. I'm handling it forward. There's a difference. She stood up, gathered her coat. Her hand went to her stomach, that automatic and by now entirely unconscious gesture. Graham collected his papers. One more thing, he said. They both looked at him. Tae-jun's attorneys reached out this morning. He is offering full financial disclosure without a court order. Every account, every holding, every asset. He's also agreed to independent oversight of the child's trust and has submitted to a condition that all decisions regarding the minor's security must be made with Miss Brooks's knowledge and consent going forward. The room was very quiet. He didn't fight any of it? Simone asked. Not a single point. Imani thought about what that meant. A man who controlled an empire that ran on the principle that information was power and disclosure was weakness, voluntarily opening every ledger, every account, every hidden mechanism, to the scrutiny of attorneys working against his interests. She didn't know what to do with that yet. It didn't change the filing. It didn't erase the bedroom or the phone on the counter or Sarah's deliberate weaponized smile. It didn't give her back the 3 years she had spent inside a marriage whose full architecture she had never been permitted to see. But it was the first thing Tae-jun had done in this entire situation that was entirely, irreversibly for her, with no version of control built into it. She put on her coat. Tell his attorneys the disclosure is accepted, she said, and tell them the divorce proceeds regardless. She walked out of the conference room, and in the elevator down to street level, she pressed the button for the lobby and watched the numbers descend and thought about Sarah. Wherever she was, whatever had happened to her in the days since the penthouse, and felt the first cold edge of a suspicion she did not yet have the information to confirm. Sarah had been prepared that night. She had not panicked. She had delivered a speech designed to wound and walked out of Imani's life without a trace within 48 hours. But she had not looked like a woman who was free. She had looked like a woman doing exactly what she'd been told and waiting to see what came next. Imani stepped out onto the sidewalk into the Seattle afternoon. She pulled her coat closed against the October wind. She had a 3 o'clock appointment with her prenatal specialist, her real one now, the one she had chosen herself through her own OB referral network. No one's arrangements, no one's access codes, and she was going to keep it, and then she was going to go back to Simone's house and eat dinner and sleep. She was not going to think tonight about the fact that the building's master keycard access record showed the third visitor exiting the penthouse at 2:31. 14 minutes inside her home. 14 minutes to move a phone, set a scene, and walk out before she came back. 14 minutes that someone had planned carefully enough and known her schedule closely enough and had enough access to enough systems that they had pulled it off without a single alarm being triggered. She was not going to think tonight about what that meant, about how deep the access ran, about how long someone had been watching the rhythms of her life, about who inside Tae-jun's world had handed her daily routine to the people who used it as a weapon. She was not going to think tonight about the name Tae-jun had gone very still at 18 months ago when he thought she wasn't close enough to hear it. Choi Sang-wook, senior lieutenant, 16 years in Tae-jun's inner circle. The man who had stood at their engagement dinner and made a toast about loyalty that had lasted 4.5 minutes and moved 2 people at the table to tears. She was not going to think about that tonight, but the thought was already there, and it wasn't going anywhere. Choi Sang-wook's toast at the engagement dinner had lasted 4 minutes and 38 seconds. Imani knew this because she had watched the video recording of it twice in the week after the wedding, during the particular kind of late-night sentimental insomnia that the first months of marriage sometimes produced. She had watched Sang-wook stand at the head of the table in the private room of the restaurant Tae-jun had reserved, 12 people, candlelight, the best Korean food in Seattle, and speak about loyalty with the particular authority of a man who had earned the right to the word. He had talked about Tae-jun at 22, broke and dangerous, and building something from nothing in a city that didn't know his name yet. He had talked about what it meant to stand beside someone through the years when standing beside them cost something real. He had raised his glass and looked directly at Imani and said that Tae-jun had spent his whole life learning to trust carefully, and that she was the first person he had ever trusted completely. 2 people at the table had cried. Imani had not. But she had believed every word. She was sitting in Simone's kitchen on a Friday morning, 10 days after walking out of the penthouse, when Graham Vance called and told her that the name her instinct had been circling for 3 days had just appeared in the financial trace his investigator had been running on the building's master keycard access system. The card was borrowed from a facilities manager named Kevin Greer, Graham said. Greer has no criminal history, no connection to Beck's organization that we can find. But he does have a brother-in-law who runs a janitorial contracting company that holds a service agreement with 3 of Tae-jun's legitimate properties. That company was originally capitalized through a small business loan that traces to a financial intermediary connected to a holding entity that, he paused to let her absorb the chain, that shares a registered agent with one of Choi Sang-wook's personal investment vehicles. Imani set her coffee mug down. "Say that again," she said. Graham said it again, slower. She sat very still. Outside, the rain had stopped for the first time in 4 days, and pale October sunlight was coming through the kitchen window at an angle, falling across the table in a narrow strip. She watched the dust move in it. "You're certain," she said. "The corporate trail is 3 layers deep, and the connection to Sang-wook's investment vehicle is indirect enough that it wouldn't survive a criminal evidentiary standard on its own. But combined with the access timing, and with some of the other things we've been finding in the financial review..." Graham stopped. "There's more. Tell me." The Baek Consortium's surveillance of Tae-jun's organization goes back at least 2 years. In that period, whoever was feeding them internal information had access to things that don't appear in any filing, any corporate record, any externally visible document. Imani's medical appointments, Her volunteer schedule, her movements through the city, the penthouse access codes, the pregnancy timeline. Another pause. The only people who had all of that in one place were Tae-jun himself, his personal security team, and his senior lieutenants. Sang-wook, Imani said. He is the most senior. He has been for 16 years. He would have access to every layer of Tae-jun's personal security infrastructure. She thought about Sang-wook's face, a square, composed face, the face of a man who had made his peace with the world, as it was, and organized his expressions accordingly. She thought about how he had always been pleasant to her. Not warm exactly, but consistently pleasant, the way a professional is pleasant to the spouse of someone important. She thought about how she had never felt anything particular about him, except that vague background sense of someone who was simply part of the structure. That was the thing about the best betrayals. She was beginning to understand. They didn't announce themselves. They just became part of the furniture. "Does Tae-jun know?" she asked. "Not yet. This information came to us through your investigative channels, not his. How you use it is your decision." She thought about that. About sitting on information that might be the most dangerous thing inside Tae-jun's organization. A traitor at the center of his inner circle, someone with access to everything, someone who had already demonstrated he was willing to use her and her unborn daughter as instruments in another man's war. She thought about Amaya. "I'm going to tell him," she said. Graham was quiet for a moment. "That's your call. I'd recommend doing it through counsel." "I'm going to tell him directly," she said. "Not because I want anything from him, because Sang-wook's access to my life doesn't end with the divorce filing. As long as he's inside Tae-jun's organization, my daughter is connected to whatever he does with that access. I need that threat addressed." "Understood," Graham said. "Set up a meeting, neutral location. You and Simone present, today if possible." "I'll make it happen." She hung up and sat at the table for a long moment. The strip of sunlight had moved. The kitchen was quiet. She pressed her hand to her stomach and felt the baby shift, a long, slow movement that traveled from one side to the other. The baby was getting bigger. The movements were becoming more deliberate, less like fluttering and more like the intentional repositioning of someone who is running out of room. "I know," Imani said quietly. "I know." The meeting happened at 3 o'clock in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in Belltown that belonged to neither side. Graham had arranged it through a neutral third-party attorney who occasionally served as a go-between in high-stakes civil matters. Tae-jun arrived 4 minutes early with no one except Min Jae, which told Imani he had taken the request seriously. A man who brought a full security detail to a meeting was a man who was performing. A man who came with one person was a man who was paying attention. She had not seen him since the night the elevator doors closed. He looked like he had not slept properly in 10 days, which she registered without satisfaction. His suit was impeccable. Tae-jun's suits were always impeccable, the last line of self-presentation he would abandon. But there were things you couldn't press away with dry cleaning, the flatness around his eyes, the slight hollowness at the jaw, the way he looked at her when she came through the door. Not with the practiced control she was used to, but with something rawer and less managed, something he covered quickly, but not quickly enough. He started to speak. Not yet," she said. She set her coat over the back of a chair and sat down. Simone sat to her right. Graham sat to her left. Min Jae stayed by the door, which was the appropriate read of the room. Tae-jun sat across from her. "Graham is going to walk you through what we found," Imani said. "I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." He nodded once. Graham laid it out. The keycard chain, the corporate trace, the investment vehicle connection, the scope of the surveillance, her medical appointments, her routes, the pregnancy timeline. I was precise and unhurried, and he watched Tae-jun's face the way a man watches a structure for stress fractures while he's describing the load it's been carrying. The fractures showed. Not dramatically. Not the way they would in a film, with a visible collapse or a fist on the table. Tae-jun's face went through something much quieter and more disturbing. A progressive tightening, a compression, as if the bones of his face were drawing closer together under the pressure of what he was hearing. His hands, resting on the table, went very still. A specific kind of still. The stillness of a man who has trained himself not to react and is currently expending everything he has on that training. When Graham finished, no one spoke for a moment. Then Tae-jun said, "Sang-wook." Not a question, The way you say a name when you are confirming something you should have understood earlier and didn't, and the not understanding has cost something irreplaceable. The evidence points to him, Graham said. We can't speak to the criminal investigation, but the civil trail is clear. Tae-jun turned and looked at Min-jae. Min-jae looked back at him. Something passed between them that Imani couldn't fully decode. Not words, not signals she could name, just the communication of two people who had worked in close proximity for years and no longer needed full sentences. Then Min-jae looked at the floor for exactly 1 second, which was the most she had ever seen him show. He knew, Tae-jun said. It wasn't directed at anyone in the room specifically. He was working something through. He was there when I told the medical team about the specialist change. He processed the security protocol adjustments for the penthouse. He stopped. His jaw tightened. How was the one who told me the penthouse code rotation schedule last month? He suggested I move it up 2 weeks early. When was that? Graham asked. 3 weeks ago. I rotated the code. He would have known the new code before the rotation was distributed to the rest of the security team. Imani watched him absorb this, the way a person absorbs the discovery that they handed someone the key to their own house while that person was already inside it, robbing them. The phone, she said. He looked at her. He knew when I left for the meeting that afternoon. He would have known my schedule down to the minute. He had the new penthouse code. He had Sarah. She held his gaze. He built the whole afternoon, Tae-jun. He knew I'd come back for the phone if it wasn't in my bag. He just needed someone to put it on the counter. Something moved across Tae-jun's face that she didn't have a word for. It wasn't guilt exactly, though guilt was part of it. It was more like the particular devastation of a man who understands that he was not simply betrayed, he was operated, used as a mechanism inside someone else's machine. His affair, his secrecy, his arrangements around her safety, all of it had been anticipated, mapped, and turned into a set of levers. He's been feeding Beck everything, Tae-jun said. His voice was completely flat now, the way a surface goes flat when all the texture has been burned off it. For how long? At least 2 years based on the financial record, Graham said. Tae-jun nodded, a very small nod. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. Then he looked up at Imani. I need you to know, he said, that whatever happens next with the divorce, whatever you decide, I am going to address this. Sang-wook is not going to remain in a position where he has access to anything connected to you or the baby. I know, she said. That's why I told you. Not because you want me to, because my daughter's safety is non-negotiable, she said. Not yours, mine. And right now, dismantling his access is the fastest way to secure it. She held his gaze. Don't mistake this for anything other than what it is. He held her gaze without flinching. I won't. She stood up. Simone and Graham rose with her. Tae-jun remained seated, which was unusual for him. He was a man who stood when people stood, who controlled the physical grammar of rooms he was in. The fact that he didn't move told her the information had landed in a way that was still reverberating through him. She was almost to the door when he said her name. She stopped, did not turn around. Thank you, he said, for telling me directly. You didn't have to. She didn't respond to that. She put her coat on and walked out into the hallway and pressed the elevator button, and she stood there breathing steadily until the doors opened and she stepped inside and the floor dropped away beneath her. Sang-wook disappeared within hours. Tae-jun moved fast, faster than she expected, and she found out later through Min-jae, who called Graham's office the following morning, that the moment Tae-jun left the meeting in Belltown, he had deployed 2 teams to locate Sang-wook. By 6 that evening, Sang-wook's apartment had been found vacated, his car abandoned in a long-term parking structure near SeaTac, and his last recorded cell signal placing him somewhere in a dead zone between the city and the coast. He had been prepared to run, which meant he had known the investigation was closing in, which meant someone had warned him. Imani sat with that information in Simone's kitchen and felt the particular cold of understanding that the circle was tighter than she had thought. That whatever Sang-wook had access to, he also had access to a warning system sophisticated enough to tell him when to leave. He hadn't panicked and run. He had gone when the moment was right. Precise. Organized. The same word she kept returning to when she thought about the afternoon in the penthouse. Organized. Everything that had happened to her had been organized by someone who knew her life well enough to know exactly which door to open and exactly when to open it. The call from Graham came on a Sunday evening 9 days after the Belltown meeting. She was in the spare room putting together the small bookshelf she had bought for the nursery. She was beginning to assemble mentally, not here, not in Simone's house, but in the place she was going to find, the place with the garden she had already decided on, the sunny kitchen, the room that would belong entirely to Amaya. She had the bookshelf pieces spread across the floor and was following the assembly diagram with the focused patience she brought to anything she was doing alone and needed to do correctly. Her phone rang. Graham's name on the screen, Sunday evening. She answered. "Sarah has been found," he said. She set the diagram down. "Found where?" "Federal investigators." She turned herself in to the FBI field office in Portland this morning. She's been in protective custody since approximately 2 a.m. A pause. She asked specifically that Imani be notified. She was quiet for a moment. She asked for me. By name. She said she had information she needed you to have before she gave it to anyone else. What kind of information? She wouldn't say over the channel. She's asking for a face-to-face. In custody, with her attorney and a federal witness coordinator present. Graham paused again. "I've spoken with my FBI contact. The meeting can be arranged within 48 hours if you agree." She looked at the pieces of the unassembled bookshelf on the floor of the spare room, the clean pine smell of it, the diagram with its numbered steps and its small clear arrows pointing to where things connected. "Arrange it," she said. The federal building in Seattle had a particular smell, recycled air, an industrial cleaner, and the dry, impersonal warmth of a building that processed a lot of human difficulty and had long since stopped absorbing it. The room they put her in was small and government beige, with a table bolted to the floor and 4 chairs and a recording unit in the corner that a federal agent confirmed was active before leaving them. Sarah looked nothing like the woman in the bedroom. That woman had been polished, composed, weaponized. The woman sitting across from Imani now was wearing borrowed clothes. Imani could tell the fit was wrong across the shoulders, and had the physical diminishment of someone who had been genuinely afraid for an extended period. The posture was different. The eyes were different. There were bruises on her left forearm that a cardigan sleeve kept slipping to cover. She was not performing now. Whatever this was, it was real. Imani sat across from her. Simone sat beside Imani. Sarah's attorney, a young Korean-American woman with a careful face, sat beside Sarah. No one spoke for a moment. Then Sarah said, "I'm sorry." Her English was precise and slightly formal, the English of someone who had learned it rigorously rather than conversationally. "Don't start there," Imani said. Her voice was even, not cold, not warm. "Start with what you came to tell me." Sarah looked at her hands, then back up. "I was recruited by the Bake organization 14 months ago, not for the affair. Originally for information theft, financial documents, client lists, shipping route data, things I could access as executive assistant that would take Bake's people months to obtain through other means. When did it change?" 6 months after I started. Sarah's jaw tightened. Baek Do-hwan contacted me directly. He told me the financial information was secondary. He needed something more disruptive. He needed Kang Tae-jun personally destabilized, his judgment compromised, his focus broken, his inner circle fractured. She paused. "He wanted me to get close to Tae-jun personally." "And you refused?" Sarah looked at her steadily. "Yes." "Then why?" "Because 3 days after I refused," Sarah said, 2 men photographed my sister and her daughters leaving school. She said it flatly, the way you describe something that has already been metabolized into the permanent record of what you are willing to do to survive. The photographs were sent to me with a message. The message did not need to be elaborate. The room was very quiet. Simone, beside Imani, had gone still with the particular stillness of an attorney processing information and reorganizing its legal weight. "How many times did Tae-jun try to end it?" Imani asked. Sarah's eyes changed, something in them that might have been relief, not at the question, but at being understood. 4 times. The first time, Baek's people delivered a video to Tae-jun's personal email showing my sister's eldest daughter being followed home from school. The second time, one of my niece's teachers was briefly hospitalized, a warning, no permanent harm but designed to show capability. She stopped, pressed her lips together. The third and fourth times, they threatened Tae-jun's own family members in Korea, his elderly aunt, his younger cousin. Imani was very still. He was trapped in it, Sarah said, and I was trapped in it, and Beck needed both of us trapped to make the mechanism work. Imani looked at her for a long moment, at the borrowed clothes, at the bruise on the forearm, at the face of a woman who had been carrying something enormous for months and had finally set it down in a room that could hold it. The bedroom, Imani said, what I walked into. That was planned. Yes. Sarah did not look away. The timing was Sang-wook's. He knew your schedule. He moved the phone. He told me exactly which room to be in and what time you would arrive. A pause. He told me what to say. The sentence landed in the room like something physical. He told you what to say, Imani repeated. He told me what you were most afraid of, what words would land in exactly the right place. Sarah's voice didn't waver, but the effort of keeping it steady was visible. He had been watching you for months. He knew about the foundation. He knew how much of your identity was tied to the work you did, the children, the community, the sense of purpose that was separate from Tae-jun's world. He told me to attack that, to make you feel that who you are outside of Tae-jun was the reason you didn't belong inside his world. Imani felt something move through her that was not quite anger. Anger was too simple. It was something more compound, the specific sensation of understanding that a wound you had been carrying was installed deliberately by someone who knew the architecture of your self-doubt and had spent months finding the precise entry point. He studied me, she said. Yes. For Baek? Yes. Sang-wook was Baek's primary internal asset. He was feeding everything, your calendar, your medical appointments, the prenatal care team, the specialist change. He flagged that to Baek's people as a potential pressure point because it showed Tae-jun was making decisions about your life without your input. Baek's analysts identified it as evidence that the marriage had structural vulnerabilities they could exploit. Simone made a sound, barely audible, but Imani heard it. The sound of an attorney who has just heard something that changes the legal shape of everything she's been building. There's more, Sarah said. Imani waited. The night you went into the elevator, after you left the penthouse. Sarah looked at her hands again, then back up, the discipline of making eye contact when you don't want to. Sang-wook was supposed to confirm to Baek that you had left the building and were not returning. When he sent that confirmation, she stopped. Baek issued an instruction that Sang-wook was meant to carry out directly. The temperature of the room seemed to shift. What instruction? Simone said. Sarah's attorney put one hand briefly on Sarah's arm, a small gesture, not stopping her, just marking the moment. There was a medical intervention planned, Sarah said carefully, connected to the prenatal care network Tae-jun had arranged, not lethal, not to you, but designed to cause complications severe enough to force a crisis, to eliminate the heir. She said the last word with the flatness of someone repeating language they found obscene but need to transmit accurately. Baek Do-hwan did not want Tae-jun to have a successor, a daughter connected to an American woman, someone outside the Korean criminal infrastructure, was considered a consolidation risk. The silence in the room was total. Imani heard her own breathing. She heard Simone's chair shift. She heard the recording unit's faint electronic hum. He wanted to hurt the baby, Imani said. He wanted to eliminate a future threat before it became one, Sarah said. That is how Baek thinks. Not emotionally, structurally. Imani put her hand on her stomach. The baby was still. Sometimes the baby went still for stretches during the day, and Imani had learned to breathe through it, to wait for the next movement, to trust the stillness rather than catastrophize it. She breathed through it now. What stopped it? She said. Sang-wook, Sarah said. And then, reading Imani's expression, I know. But even men who will sell everything have a line they won't cross. He told Baek the medical access had been disrupted, that Tae-jun had changed the care network independently in the previous week. She paused. He lied to Baek. He protected the baby. While selling everything, Imani said. Yes. Imani thought about that. About the particular moral arithmetic of a man who would hand her daily schedule to her enemy, who would orchestrate the destruction of her marriage, who would stand at her engagement dinner and toast loyalty with a glass raised in one hand while holding a knife behind his back with the other, but who had, at the last possible moment, stood between her daughter and something unthinkable. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't need to do anything with it right now. The envelope, Simone said. Graham mentioned you were carrying documents. Sarah reached into the bag at her feet and produced a sealed envelope, thick, the kind that held multiple documents, and placed it on the table. Everything, account records, communication logs, the recruitment chain, the internal surveillance reports on Imani, the instruction sets from Beck's organization going back 22 months. I kept copies of everything they sent me. Original digital files with metadata intact. The federal team has the primary copies. She looked at Imani. This set is for you, so that you have it independently, so that no version of this disappears inside someone else's process. Imani looked at the envelope. Why me? She said. Specifically. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Because Bayek's people needed you to believe you made the decision to leave on your own. They needed you to feel like it was your judgment, your response to betrayal. They needed you powerless without knowing you were powerless. She held Imani's gaze. You deserve to know that every choice that was taken from you has a name and a document attached to it. You deserve to be the one who holds the record. Imani picked up the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. She held it in both hands for a moment, this dense, sealed account of everything that had been done to her life without her knowledge, everything that had been calculated and arranged and executed by people who had mapped her fears and her schedule and her love for a man she had believed in and turned all of it into a mechanism. Then Simone's phone buzzed. Simone looked at the screen. Her face changed. What? Imani said. Simone turned the phone. A text from Graham's investigator. 3 words and a location. SUVs. Simone's block. Then another message arriving while they were still reading the first one. Sarah was followed from Portland. At least 4 vehicles. They're outside the federal building right now. Sarah had gone white. I was careful. Bayek's people are better than careful, Simone said. She was already standing, already moving into attorney in a crisis mode, already pulling up a contact on her phone. They tracked her to us, and now they know where we are and what she handed over. The federal agent reappeared in the doorway, hand on radio, face set. We need to move, all of you, now. Imani stood. She put the envelope inside her coat, against her body, between the fabric and her skin where it would stay as long as she was standing. She looked at Sarah across the table. This woman who had walked into her bedroom as an instrument of someone else's design, who had delivered a calibrated sentence designed to destroy her, who had also spent months being threatened and coerced and trapped, who had finally driven to Portland in the night and walked into a federal building and asked for Imani by name. Both things were true. Imani had learned in the past 10 days that the most dangerous situations were always the ones where both things were true at the same time. Stay close, she said to Sarah. Sarah looked at her with an expression that Imani had no category for. Then the federal agent was moving them toward the back of the building, and the corridor lights were too bright, and somewhere below them the city was wet and gray and full of people who didn't know that Baek Do-hwan's vehicles were circling a federal building in Seattle, while a pregnant woman in a borrowed conference room held a sealed envelope against her chest and moved toward whatever came next. The envelope pressed against her ribs with each step. The baby moved. Imani kept walking. The back corridor of the federal building smelled like floor wax and recycled air and the particular institutional cold of a hallway that had never once been warm enough. Imani moved fast, or as fast as 7 months and 2 weeks of pregnancy allowed, which was faster than anyone expected and not fast enough for the situation they were in. The federal agent ahead of them, a compact woman named Reyes, whose hand hadn't left her radio since the first alert came through, was talking in short bursts to someone on the other end of the channel. The words came through in fragments. 4 vehicles confirmed, 2 on the north side. Subjects are mobile. Do not engage in the corridor. Sarah was directly behind Imani. She was moving with the controlled efficiency of someone who had been afraid for a long time and had learned to function inside it, not frozen, not panicking, just reduced to the essential mechanics of putting one foot in front of the other with as much speed as the situation allowed. Her attorney was beside her, shoes wrong for running, keeping up anyway. Simone had her phone to her ear. She was talking to Graham. How many? Yes, I see it. What's the vehicle count on the south side? A pause. Tell your man to stay in position. We are moving to the service exit. We need 30 seconds of clear pavement. Imani held the envelope against her chest with one hand and kept the other hand low, instinctively, over her stomach. The service exit was at the end of the corridor, a gray metal door with a push bar and a security alarm that Reyes deactivated with a code punched in fast while still talking on the radio. The door opened to a narrow alley between the federal building and the parking structure next door. The alley was wet. The overhead light was out. Whether by design or coincidence, nobody stopped to discuss. Reyes held the door and swept the alley with her flashlight. Clear. Move. They moved. The air outside was cold and dense with the particular Seattle damp that gets into your lungs and stays. Imani's breath came out visible. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, in her temples, and the soles of her feet against the wet pavement. The baby was very still. That deep, complete stillness that sometimes happened when Imani's own adrenaline spiked, as if the baby was waiting for information. The escape vehicle was a black SUV parked at the far end of the alley, engine running, a man behind the wheel who Reyes had apparently positioned before the meeting began. 40 feet, maybe 45. They had covered half that distance when the headlights appeared. Not from the end of the alley where the vehicle was. From the cross street on the left, swinging wide, flooding the wet pavement with white light that turned everything flat and shadowless. Two vehicles, moving slow. Not pursuing, positioning. Blocking the exit with the efficiency of a team that had rehearsed this. Reyes stopped. Her hand went to her side. Don't, Imani said. Reyes looked at her. There are 4 of us, Imani said. One of us is 8 months pregnant. You discharge a weapon in this alley, and the only thing that matters after that is how fast they escalate. She was breathing hard, but her voice was level. We need 30 seconds. Find me 30 seconds. Reyes looked at the vehicles, looked back at Imani. Something in her face shifted, a recalibration, and she raised her radio instead of her weapon. Command, we have a block on the service exit. I need 2 units at the north alley entrance, and I need them now. And I need someone to tell me where the hell my backup is. The response came through in a burst of static and partial words that resolved into 2 minutes. 2 minutes was not 30 seconds. The vehicles at the end of the alley had stopped moving. Their headlights stayed on. The engine sounds idled, low and steady, the sound of patience. They weren't rushing. They had the exit. They could afford to wait. Then Sarah stepped forward. What are you? Simone started. They want me, Sarah said. She said it with the flatness of someone stating a logistical fact. And they want the documents. They don't want to discharge weapons in a federal building service alley any more than Agent Reyes does. That's why they're waiting. She looked at Imani. If I go to them? No, Imani said. If I go? No. Imani's voice was sharp enough to stop her mid-sentence. You came in from Portland with those documents because you made a decision. You don't get to undo that decision because it got difficult. Sarah looked at her with an expression that was complicated and exhausted and something that might have been gratitude, though not the easy kind. Imani's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Tae-jun. She answered it. I know where you are, he said. His voice was completely controlled. Not the control of calm, the control of a man running on adrenaline and competence, and the particular cold clarity that comes when everything is immediately at stake. My people have been monitoring the federal building's perimeter for the last 2 hours. I have 4 vehicles 2 blocks north. Minjai is with them. Tell me what you need. She looked at the headlights at the end of the alley, at Reyes on her radio, at Sarah standing in the middle of the wet pavement like a woman who has been deciding whether her life is worth defending for a very long time and has just barely landed on yes. The service alley on the east side of the federal building, Imani said. 2 of Black's vehicles are blocking the south exit. We need the north cross street opened in the next 90 seconds. Done. A half beat. Imani. Don't, she said. Not right now. Are you? I'm fine. The baby's fine. 90 seconds. She hung up. Reyes was looking at her. Reinforcements from a different direction, Imani said. Whose reinforcements? Reyes asked. Imani met her gaze. Does it matter right now? Reyes held her look for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned back to the alley. We move on my signal. When I say go, we run. Everyone runs, no exceptions, no stopping. Simone put her hand briefly on Imani's arm, not guiding, not pulling, just marking the moment. Imani pressed the envelope harder against her chest. The cardboard edge dug into her palm through the fabric of her coat. The baby moved. One strong, deliberate kick, the kind that meant she had woken up and was making her presence known. I know, Imani said under her breath. I know, we're moving. The 90 seconds felt like 8 minutes. Then they felt like 8 seconds. Then the cross street to the north lit up, not with headlights, but with the specific visual chaos of multiple vehicles moving fast, and a set of halogen floods that turned the alley entrance into something bright enough to see clearly. And the two blocking vehicles at the south end had to make a choice, and the choice they made was to assess the new threat rather than hold position. Go, Reyes said. They ran. Imani ran differently than she had run in 7 months. Leaning back slightly, one arm crooked over her stomach, every step deliberate, the wet pavement slippery under her shoes. Simone was half a step behind her. Sarah moved fast and low. The attorney had abandoned her shoes at some point and was running in stockinged feet, which was both absurd and completely practical. The SUV's door opened before they reached it. The driver was already out, holding the rear door, scanning the alley with the economy of motion of someone who did this kind of thing regularly. They got in. All 4 of them, compressed into the back seat, breathing hard. The door closed. The vehicle moved before Reyes had fully settled into the front passenger seat. Imani looked out the rear window. Tae-jun's vehicles were visible at the alley entrance. She could see their configuration, blocking the cross street, the precise geometric logic of it, the way they had positioned to cut off the pursuit angle. She couldn't see Min Jae. She couldn't see Tae-jun. Then a second set of vehicles appeared from the east, different plates, different configuration. Blue light in the grille, unmarked Federal. Beck's vehicles had nowhere to go. The SUV carrying Imani turned north and accelerated, and the Federal building disappeared behind them, and the alley with its blown-out overhead light and its wet pavement and its headlights blocking the exit became something in the rearview mirror that shrank and then was gone. The hospital was not the original plan. The original plan, to the extent there had been one in the past 4 hours of managed crisis, was a Federal safe house in Tukwila, where Sarah would be secured and Imani and Simone would be handed to a separate transport. But Reyes made the call from the front seat, talking fast on a radio, and the destination changed, because when you have a pregnant woman in a vehicle coming off an adrenaline event in a cold alley, you take her somewhere with a medical team. Imani argued with this for approximately 30 seconds before her body made the argument irrelevant. The cramping started before they reached the on-ramp. Not labor. She knew what labor felt like from everything she had read and been told. But the body's protest at having been put through something it was not equipped for, at having been asked to run on wet pavement with its heart rate elevated and its hands full of an envelope and its daughter awake inside it. She pressed her hand to her stomach and breathed through it and did not tell anyone for 3 minutes because she was still working through something and she needed those 3 minutes. Then Simone looked at her. Imani, I'm fine. You're not fine. You're doing the thing where you breathe through your nose when something hurts. She exhaled. Some cramping, probably stress-related. Simone had already moved, was already talking to Reyes, and the next 40 minutes were the particular loss of control that hospitals impose on everyone equally, regardless of how well you have managed everything up to that point. Triage and vital signs, and the cold gel of an ultrasound transducer, and a doctor asking her to describe the pain on a scale, and Imani thinking that no scale had been invented for the specific compound sensation of the last 4 hours. The doctor was young and clear-eyed and efficient. She ran the ultrasound and looked at the monitor and looked at Imani and said, Baby's heart rate is strong. Position is good. What you're feeling is almost certainly Braxton Hicks aggravated by physical exertion and stress. I want to keep you for observation for 2 hours. I don't have 2 hours, Imani said. You have exactly 2 hours, the doctor said, with the particular calm of someone who has had this conversation before and knows which version of it ends well. Your baby has had a significant evening, 2 hours. Imani lay back on the examination table and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Simone was in the hallway making calls. Sarah had been taken to a different part of the building under federal escort. The attorney was somewhere locating dry socks. Reyes was outside the room, door cracked, radio still active, the low static of ongoing coordination filtering through the gap. It was quiet enough that Imani could hear her own heartbeat. She still had the envelope inside her coat, which was folded over the arm of the chair beside the examination table. She looked at it, the thick sealed envelope with its documentation of everything that had been done to her. The names, the accounts, the instruction sets, the surveillance reports, the record of her own schedule used against her by people who had never once looked her in the eye. She thought about Sang-wook. She thought about Sarah's face in the conference room, saying, "He told me what you were most afraid of." She thought about Tae-jun standing in the Belltown conference room with his hands flat on the table and the bones of his face doing that compression thing as the full shape of the betrayal became clear to him. She thought about the baby's kick in the alley, that single hard deliberate movement that had felt, in the moment, like a reminder. She pressed her hand to her stomach and felt the answering flutter. Smaller now, the baby settling, the storm passing. "I know," she said quietly. "We made it." Tae-jun arrived 40 minutes into the 2-hour observation period. He didn't come in immediately. That was the first thing she noticed when the nurse mentioned he was outside. That he had arrived and had not pushed through the door, had not invoked any version of his authority to gain immediate access, had not done any of the things a man of his particular background and disposition might be expected to do when his pregnant wife was in a hospital. After a crisis event, he considered his fault. He was waiting in the corridor. She thought about it for 3 minutes. Then she told the nurse to let him in. He looked worse than he had in the Belltown conference room. The suit was there, but the jacket was gone, left somewhere in the last few hours of logistics and management and whatever he had done to position 4 vehicles at a federal building's perimeter without being on anyone's official radar. His left hand had a cut across the knuckle, so minor, already dried, the kind you get from moving fast through a situation that has edges. He hadn't addressed it. He came in and stopped inside the doorway, which was the right read, coming far enough to be present, not so far as to crowd the space. He looked at her, at the monitor beside the bed, at the graph of the baby's heartbeat moving steadily across the screen. "She okay?" he said. "She's fine. Strong heartbeat. I'm in observation for stress cramping." He nodded. He looked at the monitor for another moment, then back at her. "The extraction worked." "Yes." Federal agents picked up 2 of Baek's vehicles. The others withdrew. "Sarah is secured." "I know." "Baek Do-hwan is—" He stopped. "My attorneys are in contact with the federal prosecutor's office. Given what Sarah has handed over, combined with the financial trails your investigator documented, there will be a warrant within 24 hours, possibly less." "Good." He didn't move from the doorway. He was watching her with that stripped-back attention, the one without the usual layers of control and management. "You negotiated a tactical extraction from a federal building in an active threat situation while 7 months pregnant," he said, "without losing the evidence." Someone had to. His jaw tightened. Not at her, at himself. She could read that distinction now, had spent 3 years learning the grammar of his face. "Imani." "I don't want an apology right now," she said. "I want you to hear something." He went still. "Sarah told me everything," Imani said. "The coercion, the threats against her family, the times you tried to end it and Beck's people answered with new leverage." She held his gaze. "I understand what she told me. I'm not going to pretend I don't understand it." He didn't speak. "But here's what I also understand," she continued. "At any point in the last 8 months, you could have come to me. You could have told me there was a threat. You could have told me there was an operative inside your organization who had access to my life. You could have treated me like someone with the right to know what was happening to her own existence." She let that sit. "You didn't. You made every decision inside your own perimeter and handed me the results. And what that told Beck's people, what it told Sang-wook, was that I was a variable in your equation, not a person with my own agency. That made me easier to use." Tae-jun's eyes were very dark and very still. "If you had told me," she said, "I would have been watching. I would have noticed the phone. I would have questioned the morning the specialist changed. I would have been alert, in the way that I know how to be alert when I understand the situation." She exhaled slowly. "Your secrecy wasn't just a betrayal of my trust. It was a tactical error. It left me exposed." The room was quiet except for the monitor's soft rhythm. "You're right," he said. "I know I am." "That doesn't—" He stopped, started again. "There is nothing I can say to you in this room that reaches the level of what I owe you." "I'm not collecting a debt," she said. "I'm telling you the truth so you understand it completely. So that whatever comes next, with Amaya, with the custody arrangement, with whatever version of a relationship we have when this is over, you understand why it has to be structured the way it is. Why I need the decisions that concern my daughter and me to be visible, documented, made with my knowledge." "I accept that," he said. "Completely." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm telling you to your face instead of through Graham." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the monitor again, at the steady, persistent rhythm of Amaya's heartbeat crossing the screen. Something moved across his face that was private enough that she looked away from it, because some things are not hers to witness even when she is the reason they are happening. "The divorce proceeds," she said. "I know. No conditions. None from me." She nodded. She looked at the ceiling. She felt the cramping ease, a slow release, like something gradually unclenching. "You should go. I'm going to sleep for an hour, and then I need to be debriefed by Graham about the next 24 hours. He moved to leave. "Tae-jun." He stopped. "The cut on your hand," she said. "There's a nurse at the station who can—" "I'll handle it," he said. "Handle it before you leave the building," she said, "not on the drive back." He looked at her with an expression she did not have a name for. Then he said, "Okay." He left. She lay in the observation room and listened to the monitor and thought about everything that was still in motion. The warrant, the federal case, the evidence in the envelope, the divorce filing, the custody structure Graham was building, the house near Lake Washington she had already started mentally furnishing, and she let herself feel all of it at once instead of managing it into manageable pieces. It was a lot. It was a completely unreasonable amount for one person. She had handled it forward anyway. Baek Do-hwan's arrest warrant was issued at 11:14 the following morning. Imani was at Simone's house when Graham called with the confirmation. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the assembly instructions for the bookshelf she had abandoned 3 nights ago, which she had brought over in a bag because some things you need to finish just to prove to yourself that you can still do ordinary things. "Federal agents picked him up at the Westin downtown," Graham said. "He checked in yesterday under a corporate alias. They had him in 20 minutes. Sang-wook? Still missing, but with Baek in custody and Sarah's testimony, his leverage disappears. There's a warrant out. It's a matter of time." She looked at the bookshelf instructions. Step 4. Insert the dowel pins into the pre-drilled holes. Ensure flush alignment before proceeding. "What about the charges against Tae-jun?" she asked. Graham was quiet for a moment. "He contacted the federal prosecutor's office this morning, voluntarily. He's offering full cooperation, every account, every operation, every record. He's turning over the entire organization." She set down her tea. "Everything?" she said. "Everything. The legitimate holdings will be transferred to independent oversight. The criminal operations, routes, accounts, contacts, agreements. He's handing over the complete record. With testimony." A pause. "His attorney estimates it's the most comprehensive voluntary disclosure of a criminal enterprise in this jurisdiction in 15 years. She sat with that for a moment. "He told me last night the divorce proceeds with no conditions," she said. "He accepted full custody terms without negotiation. Now he's dismantling the empire." She was thinking out loud, not quite to Graham. "He's not leaving himself anything to retreat to." "No," Graham agreed. "He's not." "What does his attorney say about the sentence?" "With full cooperation and voluntary disclosure, somewhere between 18 and 24 months is the realistic range. Possibly less, depending on the weight of the testimony." She thought about that. About a man who had spent 15 years building something into which he had poured every version of power he understood, and who was now, with whatever clarity had arrived in the past 2 weeks, taking it apart piece by piece and handing the pieces to the people whose job was to dismantle it. She didn't know what to call that. She didn't need to call it anything right now. "Graham," she said. "Yes." "I want the nursery furniture order confirmed today. The house near Lake Washington, I'm signing the lease this week. I need the custody framework drafted with specific language about security decisions requiring my documented consent, and I need it filed before anything in Tae-jun's cooperation agreement gets finalized, so our structure is established independently of whatever deal he makes.
I'll have it ready by Thursday, Graham said. Wednesday, she said. A pause. Wednesday, he agreed. She hung up and looked at the bookshelf instructions. Step 4, dowel pins, flush alignment. She picked up the instruction sheet and the small bag of hardware, and she started on step 4. Song-wook surrendered 3 days later. He walked into a federal field office in Tacoma, Sumao at 7 in the morning with his attorney and no visible emotion. Imani heard about it from Graham, who heard about it from his FBI contact, who described a man who looked like he had been awake for 72 hours and had arrived at some accommodation with himself about what came next. She felt nothing particular about that. Not satisfaction, not anger. Something closer to the absence of something. The specific quiet that occupies a space where a threat used to be. She was in the new house when the call came. The house near Lake Washington, which she had signed for 2 days earlier, a place with a view of water through the kitchen window and a neglected garden that she intended to do something about when the weather changed, and she was not 8 months pregnant and the world was slightly less on fire. The nursery was a bare room with good light and a closet she had already mentally organized. She was standing in the nursery when Graham called. She stood there after she hung up, in the empty room with its good light and its smell of fresh paint, and she felt the baby move. A long traveling movement from left to right, the kind that happened when she was awake and active. And Imani put both hands on her stomach and stood in the room that was going to be Amaya's room, and breathed. The threat was not completely gone. It would not be completely gone for some time. There were legal proceedings and federal cases and the ongoing unwinding of 2 criminal organizations whose business interests were not instantly resolved by the arrest of their principals. There would be things to manage and monitor and document for months, but the specific danger, the designed, organized, targeted danger that had turned her pregnancy and her marriage and her daily schedule into instruments in another man's war. That danger had a name now. It had documents attached to it. It was in federal hands. It no longer moved around her life invisible and unopposed. She stood in the empty nursery and let that settle into her the way good information settles. Not triumphant, not relieved exactly, just recalibrated. The world was the new shape now. She could work with this shape. Her phone buzzed again. Not Graham this time. A number she didn't recognize. Then she did recognize it, because she had seen it once on a screen in a federal conference room on the contact sheet Sarah's attorney had provided. She answered. "It's me," Sarah said. Her voice was quieter over the phone, more stripped down. "I'm sorry to call directly. I thought you should hear from me directly that I'm cooperating fully with the federal team. Everything I know, everything that hasn't already been in the documents." "I know," Imani said. "Graham keeps me informed." A pause. "I also wanted to say—" Sarah stopped, started again. "I don't expect anything from you. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say that I am sorry. Not in the way you say it when you're trying to make someone feel better about what you did. In the actual way. Which means I understand if it doesn't help." Imani stood in the nursery. The light was moving, the cloud cover shifting, the winter sun making one of its brief Seattle appearances, sending a strip of pale gold across the bare floor. "I believe you," she said. "That's more than I expected." "It's not forgiveness," Imani said. "I'm going to need more time for that. Maybe a lot more time. Maybe something I can only get to in pieces." A pause. "But I believe you. And I wanted you to know that, because you drove to Portland in the middle of the night and walked into a federal building and asked for me by name, and that matters. Whatever else is true, that matters." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Where will you go?" Imani asked. "After the federal process?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere my sister and her children can be safe, away from the Pacific Northwest for a while." Another pause. "Away from all of this." "Good," Imani said. "That's a good plan." After she hung up, she stood in the nursery a while longer. She was thinking about the garden below the window. The neglected garden, its beds full of what had been allowed to go untended, the bare branches of something that had once been flowering and had been left long enough without attention that it looked, from the window, like it might be past recovery. She had learned enough about growing things to know that looked past recovery.
and was past recovery were completely different conditions. She would deal with the garden in the spring. Right now, she had a room to build. The labor started at 2:47 in the morning 11 days later. Not the false kind. Not the cramping she had felt in the alley. The real thing. A long, deep wave of it that woke her out of sleep with a clarity that left no room for doubt about what was happening. She was premature by 3 weeks. She was also completely ready. She called Simone first because Simone was 20 minutes away and because Simone was the person she wanted in the room. Then she called her hospital's labor and delivery line to confirm she was coming in. Then she sat on the edge of the bed in the new house and breathed through 2 contractions and timed the gap and understood that she had a reasonable window and did not need to panic. Then she called Tae-jun. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he had not been sleeping either. "It's time," she said. A pause of exactly 2 seconds. "I'm on my way." "Meet me at the hospital. I'll be with Simone. You can—" She breathed through the beginning of another contraction, keeping her voice level by an act of will. That was easier than she expected because the body, when it is doing something enormous, does not have spare capacity for anything that is not immediately necessary. "You can be there, in the waiting area. That's all I'm saying right now." "I understand," he said. She hung up, picked up the bag she had packed 2 weeks ago, and placed beside the bedroom door because she was not the kind of woman who left that particular preparation to the last minute. And she walked down the hallway of the new house and out to her car, and she drove herself to the hospital in the Seattle dark. She was not afraid. She had run through a federal building service alley in the rain. She had stood in a conference room and given Tae-jun information that could get her killed by his enemies. She had held a sealed envelope against her chest, while Beck's vehicles blocked an exit and told the people around her what to do and kept her voice steady throughout. Labor was hard and physical and enormous and entirely hers. She drove toward the hospital through the Seattle pre-dawn, the streets dark and wet and empty the way only cities are empty at 3 in the morning. And she felt another contraction build and crest and release, and she breathed through it exactly the way she had practiced. And she thought, this is the last thing that Kang Tae-jun's world, or Baek Do-hwan's war, or Sang-wook's 16-year betrayal, or Sarah's coerced performance in a bedroom doorway, or any of it, the last thing any of it touches. This part belongs entirely to her and Amaya. She pulled into the hospital entrance, and the automatic doors opened, and the light inside was warm and clinical and real, and she walked through them. Behind her in the parking structure's lowest level, 3 men had been waiting in the dark for 40 minutes. Remnants of Beck's organization, a cleanup crew deployed before the arrest warrant was issued, operating on instructions that had not been countermanded because Beck was in custody and no one had officially stood down the peripheral units. They knew Tae-jun would come. They knew the hospital. They knew the timing. Sang-wook had given them the prenatal due date 6 weeks ago. When Tae-jun's vehicle pulled into the underground parking structure at 3:22 in the morning, they were already in position. The fight lasted 4.5 minutes. Tae-jun had one advantage that the 3 men in the parking structure had not factored into their planning. He had understood for 11 days that this night was coming, that his cooperation with federal authorities had not instantly neutralized every peripheral threat his organization's dismantling had left exposed, and he had done what he always did when he understood a risk and could not eliminate it. He had prepared. Min-jae was 2 vehicles behind him. The parking structure's 3rd level became a chaos of echoing sound and tire screech, and the particular brutality of close-quarters conflict in an enclosed space where every surface amplifies everything. Tae-jun took a blow across the left shoulder that would leave him unable to lift his arm above his chest for the next 3 weeks. He returned it with the economical viciousness of a man who learned to fight in circumstances where losing was not a recoverable outcome. Min-jae arrived in time to tip the balance. When it was over, when federal agents responding to Min-jae's emergency alert were securing the 3 men and Tae-jun was leaning against the concrete pillar with his hand pressed to his shoulder and blood visible on the sleeve of his shirt, he pushed himself upright, walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the 3rd floor, and rode it up. He was not going to miss this. The elevator opened onto a linoleum corridor with fluorescent lights and the distant sound of institutional activity. He walked to the nurse's station and gave his name and explained, with the controlled coherence of a man bleeding through his sleeve, that he was the father of the child currently being delivered,
and that he would like to know which waiting area he was meant to be in. The nurse looked at his sleeve. "Sir, you need to be seen by—" "After," he said. "Please." She looked at him for a long moment, with the particular look of someone weighing the specific human situation in front of them against the procedural correct response. And then she pointed him toward a chair in the waiting area outside labor and delivery. He sat down. He pressed his hand to his shoulder. He waited. Simone came out 47 minutes later. She looked at him, at the sleeve, at his face. She said nothing about any of it for a full 5 seconds, which was the most restraint he had ever seen her exercise. Then she said, "She's pushing. Everything is normal. The baby is early, but the size is fine and the position is good." She paused. "She doesn't need you in there." "I know," he said, "but she knows you're here." He nodded. Simone looked at his sleeve one more time. Then she went back inside. Tae-jun sat in the chair in the waiting area outside labor and delivery, bleeding quietly through his shirt, and he waited. He had dismantled everything he built. He had handed the records to the people whose job was to process them. He had accepted what was coming with the specific equanimity of a man who has finally and completely run out of ways to protect himself from his own choices. There was nothing left to manage. There was only this: a chair in a corridor, a wound he was ignoring, and a door he was not going to walk through until he was invited. 31 minutes later, the sound he had been waiting for arrived through the wall of the delivery room. Thin and furious and unmistakably alive, the first voice of someone who had just discovered the world was louder and colder and more demanding than the one she had left, and was making her feelings about that extremely clear. Tae-jun closed his eyes. His hand came away from his shoulder. He sat in the chair and listened to his daughter announce herself to the world. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, he had no idea what came next and found, to his complete surprise, that he could live inside that not knowing without needing to resolve it into something he controlled. The crying continued, strong and continuous and absolutely certain of itself. She had her mother's stubbornness. He was already sure of it. Imani Brooks Kang entered the world at 4:51 in the morning in the middle of a Seattle November, weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and an opinion about the temperature of the delivery room that she communicated immediately and without ambiguity. She cried for 40 seconds straight. Then she stopped, the way newborns sometimes do, abruptly, completely, as if they have taken a full inventory of the situation and decided it is manageable after all. And she looked up at the lights with the unfocused, ancient expression of someone who has just arrived somewhere after a very long journey and is still deciding what to make of it. Imani was the first thing she looked toward, not focused, newborns don't focus, but oriented. The way a plant orients toward light without understanding what light is. Some deep mechanical knowing. Imani looked down at her and felt something move through her that had no adequate name. Not joy exactly, though joy was in it. Not relief, though relief was there too. Something more like recognition. The sense of meeting someone you have been waiting for without knowing it. Someone whose existence rearranges the furniture of everything that came before. "Hi," Imani said. Her voice came out rough and wrecked from the labor, the hours of it, the physical enormity of it. She didn't care. Amaya's face did something complicated, a micro-expression that moved through several configurations before settling into a kind of focused alertness. Her eyes not quite finding Imani's, but aimed in the right direction. "I've got you," Imani said. "We're okay." Simone was in the corner of the room. She had been there throughout the labor, not hovering, not managing, just present the way she had been present in her doorway on the night Imani showed up soaked in the rain, doing the specific thing Simone did best, which was occupying space in a way that made it feel safer without taking it over. Now she was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and an expression on her face that she would deny for years afterward if anyone described it as sentimental. "She has your jawline," Simone said. "She's 4 minutes old." "I can already see it." The attending physician, efficient and warm in equal measure, finished what needed to be finished while the nurses did what nurses do after a birth. The weighing, the measuring, the quiet professional choreography of people who help new humans arrive for a living and have found a way to make it feel both ordinary and significant at the same time. At some point during that process, someone knocked on the door. Simone went. She came back a moment later and looked at Imani. "He's outside,"
Imani looked at Amaya. At the dark hair and the old face and the hands, tiny, perfect, already moving with that newborn purposefulness that looks like it means something even when it doesn't yet. In a minute, she said. She held her daughter for that minute in full. Just that. Just the weight of her, the warmth of her, the reality of her, after 7 months of abstraction. A name, a heartbeat on a monitor, a kick in a federal building service alley. Now here, actual and complete. Then she nodded to Simone. Tae-jun came in quietly. He had changed his shirt. Someone, probably Min-jae, had anticipated this and brought a clean one to the hospital. But his left arm was in a temporary sling, white against the dark fabric of his jacket, and his face carried the specific compound exhaustion of a man who has fought through something physical, waded through something emotional, and arrived at a moment for which no version of his preparation was actually adequate. He stopped several feet from the bed. He looked at Amaya. Whatever moved across his face in that moment was private and enormous, and Imani looked away from it because some things are not meant to be witnessed, even by the person who made them possible. She heard his breath catch, heard him release it slowly. Amaya, he said. Not to Imani, to her. The baby's face did the complicated thing again. The micro-movement, the orientation towards sound. Amaya Brooks Kang, Imani said. He looked up at her then. Something in the name, the order of it, the Brooks coming first, the deliberate architecture of it, registered clearly. He didn't argue it. He didn't negotiate it. He looked at his daughter and back at Imani and nodded once, with the full weight of a man accepting something that is correct. I'm not asking you to cancel anything, he said. His voice was low and stripped down. I know what's coming. I accepted it. A pause. I just want you to know that whatever happens to me after this room, whatever the next year or 2 years looks like, I'm going to be whatever she needs me to be, from wherever I am. I know, Imani said. Not because it earns me anything. I know, she said again. He looked at Amaya one more time. He didn't ask to hold her. He didn't move closer. He simply looked at her with the complete attention of a man committing something to memory, the exact weight of a moment he understood he did not fully deserve and was receiving anyway. Then he said, I'll let you rest. He left. Simone watched the door close behind him. She was quiet for a moment. Then she came and sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at Amaya, who had fallen asleep with the immediate totality that newborns achieve, the sleep of someone for whom consciousness is still a new and tiring condition. You okay? Simone said. Imani thought about it honestly. I will be. That's the right answer. I know. Simone reached out and adjusted the edge of the blanket around Amaya's shoulder. A small, precise gesture. The kind you make when you don't know how to say the thing you mean, and so you find something physical to do that carries it. You built something good tonight, Simone said. She built herself, Imani said. I just kept the circumstances manageable. Simone looked at her for a moment. Then she made a sound, half laugh, half exhale, that acknowledged the particular Imani-ness of that sentence and let it stand. The federal proceedings against Baek Do-hwan moved through the system with the methodical momentum of a large legal structure finally getting purchase on something it had been trying to hold for years. The charges were numerous and layered: racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, criminal coercion, and a separate charge related to the planned interference with Imani's prenatal care that the federal prosecutor pursued with a specific and visible determination. Imani gave testimony twice. Once in a preliminary hearing via written deposition, once in person, in a federal courtroom, 8 weeks after Amaya's birth. She came with Simone beside her and Graham behind her, and she sat in the witness chair and answered every question directly and without embellishment. And when Baek's defense attorney attempted to characterize the entirety of her account as the emotionally compromised narrative of a woman in the middle of a divorce from a criminal enterprise, she looked at him with the particular steadiness of someone who has been through considerably more than this and said, "The documentation speaks for itself. I'm here to explain what it means. Ask me a specific question." The judge did not sustain the defense's objection to that response. Tae-jun's testimony was separate and sealed under federal cooperation protocol. She did not attend it. She did not need to. Graham's contact confirmed it was comprehensive. Several days of detailed accounting, every route, every account, every agreement, every name in the organization's operational structure laid out with the precision of a man who had run it and understood it completely and was now taking it apart with the same thoroughness. It cost him. She could see it in the brief interactions they had during those early months. The custody logistics, the supervised visits that were structured around Amaya's schedule, and Imani's documented consent requirements, the occasional necessary phone call about a legal detail that touched both of them. He was thinner, quieter in a different way than his operational quiet. Not controlled, just reduced. Like a city after a major demolition, where the skyline is changed and the absence of what was there is more visible than what remains. She did not feel sorry for him. She felt something more complicated than sorry, and she did not try to name it. Oh, the sentencing came down in March. 22 months, federal facility. With full cooperation credit and the weight of his voluntary disclosure, it was the lower end of what his attorney had projected. His legal team called it a significant outcome. Graham relayed the information to Imani without editorial comment, which she appreciated. She was in the new house when she heard. In the kitchen, which had the sunny quality she had wanted, the light came through the window above the sink in the late morning in a way that made even the ordinary business of washing dishes feel like it was happening in a painting. She was feeding Amaya, who was 3.5 months old and had developed in that time the precise opinions about feeding schedules and preferred holding positions and acceptable ambient noise levels of someone who had been working these preferences out since before birth and was now simply implementing them in the world. She set the phone down after Graham's call and looked at Amaya, who looked back at her with the dark, focused attention she had been deploying since the first weeks of her life. Not Tae-jun's attention exactly, not Imani's, but some third thing, some new configuration that belonged entirely to herself. "Your father got his sentence today," Imani said. Amaya moved her mouth in the way that was not yet a smile, but was the mechanical precursor to one. 22 months, Imani said. "He'll be out before your second birthday." She thought about what that meant, about the next 22 months, the things Amaya would do and become and discover in that time, the teeth and the walking and the first attempts at language, all of it happening in real time while Tae-jun watched from a screen, from a scheduled call, from the managed distance of a federal facility in the Pacific Northwest. She thought about the children's books Graham had mentioned, how Tae-jun had already arranged, through his attorney, to send a set of books to Amaya each month. Picture books, board books, the kind with simple large text and bright images. Nothing elaborate, just books. She thought about a mafia boss who had run a criminal empire for 15 years, arranging picture book deliveries to his infant daughter from a federal facility, and she felt something that she was not going to describe to anyone, but that she acknowledged privately was more tender than she expected. She was allowed to feel tender things about him. Feeling them did not obligate her to do anything with them. The book came out 14 months later. She had not planned it as a book exactly. She had started writing the way she started most things that mattered to her. Because it needed to be done, and she was the person available to do it. Notes, at first. Long private documents on her laptop, written during Amaya's nap times in the first months when the house was quiet and the garden was still bare and the legal proceedings were still moving through their various stages. She wrote about what had happened, not the crime narrative, not Tae-jun's organization or Beck's conspiracy, but the interior of it. What it felt like to discover that your life had been mapped and managed and operated by people who had studied your fears. What it meant to understand, finally and completely, the difference between being loved and being controlled. What it cost to walk out of a penthouse elevator 7 months pregnant with nothing but your phone and your decision. What it meant to stay walked out, even when the full picture turned out to be more complicated than the moment of walking. Her editor, found through a connection of Simone's, a small independent press in Seattle that published serious non-fiction, read the first 40 pages and called her the following morning. "This is not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" Imani asked. "Something angrier." "I was angry," Imani said. "I wrote through that. What's on the page is what's left after the anger." The editor was quiet for a moment. "That's the book," she said. "That's exactly the book." It took 10 months to write and 4 more to publish. She did the work in the kitchen with the good light, and in the nursery while Amaya slept, and at the table in Simone's house on the Sundays when Simone made coffee and left her alone with her laptop, and occasionally brought sandwiches without being asked. She wrote the way she had always worked best, forward, with the discipline of someone who understands that the work is not about inspiration, but about showing up to the page the same way you show up to everything that matters, prepared, imperfect, and willing to do it anyway. The title was simple. She agonized over it for 3 weeks and then arrived at the one that had been there from the beginning, between protection and possession. The week it was released, a woman she had never met left a comment on the book's online listing. It was long and specific, a description of a relationship the woman had been in for 7 years, a pattern she had not been able to name until she read certain pages. She described the book as the first thing that gave her language for something she had only been able to feel. Imani read the comment 3 times. Then she closed the laptop and went to find Amaya, who was in the garden, 14 months old, walking now with the enthusiastic instability of someone who has recently discovered locomotion and is still calibrating the relationship between intention and balance. And she picked her up and held her in the garden in the pale Seattle spring and felt the particular satisfaction of having made something that reached past the edges of her own story and found other people inside it. That was the thing about the literacy work, the thing she had always known, the thing Sarah's weaponized words had tried to make her feel small for knowing. When you spend your life building things that help people find language for their experience, you are not choosing service over power. You are doing the only kind of work that actually compounds. Every person who finds language for their experience can give that language to someone else. It moves forward in ways you can never fully track. Sarah had tried to make her feel diminished by that. She understood now that the attempt had been precisely because it was the thing about Imani that Bayek's people couldn't replicate or control. Tae-jun was released on a Thursday in October, 22 months after sentencing. Imani was not there. There was no reason for her to be. Min-jae picked him up. She knew this because Amaya's custody coordinator sent the standard notification of the primary guardian's release date and transport arrangements, the way the coordination protocol required. And that was the extent of her direct involvement. The first visit happened 2 weeks later. Structured, as all the visits were. Documented, scheduled, conducted in a space that was Imani's home rather than neutral territory, because Amaya was not yet 2 years old, and the literature on early childhood attachment strongly recommended that supervised parental contact happen in the child's primary environment during these years. He arrived on time. This did not surprise her. Whatever else he was, Tae-jun was not a man who arrived late to something that mattered. He looked different, not diminished. She had expected diminished, or some version of the reduction she had seen in those first months before the sentencing, but that was not what stood in her doorway. He looked settled, like something that had been in motion for a long time, had finally stopped moving and found that the stillness, while unfamiliar, was not unbearable. He had cut his hair shorter. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that were new. He was wearing a simple jacket and plain dark trousers. Nothing like the immaculate professional presentation that had always been part of how he moved through the world. He looked like a man who had spent 22 months without access to most of the things he had used to construct his identity, and had discovered, somewhere in that process, that the things that remained were enough to stand on. "She's in the garden," Imani said. He looked past her. Through the kitchen with its good light to the back door and the garden beyond it, where Amaya was currently engaged in a project that involved transferring small stones from one part of the garden bed to another for reasons that were entirely clear to her and entirely opaque to anyone watching. He went toward it. Imani stayed in the kitchen. She watched through the window. Tae-jun stepped into the garden, and Amaya looked up, and the thing that happened on her face was immediate and unambiguous. The recognition, the brightening, the particular joy of a small child who has been waiting for something and has suddenly received it. She had seen him on screens. She had heard his voice through speakers during the monthly calls that Imani had maintained because a child's relationship with her father was not contingent on Imani's relationship with him. But this was real, physical, present. Appa, Amaya said. It was one of the words she had been working on. She said it with the confident imprecision of a child who has identified the right sound and is still negotiating the exact shape of it. Tae-jun crouched down to her level. He didn't rush to her or lift her. He waited, at her eye level, and let her make the approach. She crossed the garden to him with her unsteady walk, arms out for balance, and grabbed his jacket with both hands and looked at his face from 6 inches away with the focused inspection of someone conducting a thorough assessment. Then she patted his cheek, twice, with her whole hand. He said something to her in Korean, soft, low, the cadence of someone talking to a small person they are trying not to overwhelm. Amaya considered this. Then she turned and pointed at the stones she had been moving, apparently explaining the project. He looked at the stones. He nodded seriously. He crouched further down and picked up one of the stones and handed it to her with the gravity of someone participating in an important undertaking. Imani turned away from the window. She made tea. She did not watch. She gave them 20 minutes that were theirs. Not supervised in the hovering sense, not monitored, just conducted in her house, which was also Amaya's house, with Imani inside if she was needed. That was the structure. It had been carefully built, and it worked, and she trusted it. When she brought 2 cups of tea to the back step, Amaya was showing Tae-jun the low stone wall at the edge of the garden. It was maybe 18 inches high, decorative, old, the kind of wall that had been there when Imani moved in, and that she had left because she liked the texture of it against the garden beds. Amaya had been fascinated by it for weeks. She had been attempting to scale it with the methodical determination of someone who has identified an objective and is working through the technical challenges. She couldn't quite get her leg up high enough. Tae-jun crouched behind her. He didn't lift her. He didn't tell her she couldn't do it. He just waited, close enough to catch her if she fell, while she figured out the approach. Imani sat on the back step with the 2 cups of tea and watched. Amaya tried 3 times. Each time she got closer. Each time she adjusted her technique based on what had failed, shifting her grip, changing the angle of her knee. On the 3rd attempt, she got one leg over the top and teetered, and Tae-jun's hands came up close to her without touching her, ready, and she caught her balance herself and got the 2nd leg over and stood on top of the wall. She raised both arms. Not because anyone had taught her to. It was simply the natural expression of having accomplished something, the body's automatic language for triumph. Tae-jun laughed. Imani heard it and felt something loosen in her chest. Not the big dramatic loosening of a crisis resolving, but the small, specific loosening of something that had been held tight for a long time, releasing its last tension. He laughed the way he must have laughed before she knew him, before the years of operational control, before the empire, and the secrecy, and all the things that had grown over whatever he originally was. It was an uncomplicated laugh. She hadn't known he had one. She got up and brought him his tea. He looked up from Amaya's position of triumph on the wall and took the cup. Their fingers didn't touch during the handoff. She sat back down on the step. He stayed where he was, close enough to catch Amaya if she decided to descend the ambitious way. They sat in the garden in the October afternoon, the 2 of them, with Amaya on her wall, and nobody said anything for a while. Then Tae-jun said, "I read your book." She looked at him. "Minjae brought me a copy 3 weeks after it came out." He was looking at Amaya, not at Imani. "I read it twice." She waited. "The chapter about the phone," he said. "The one where you talk about standing in the kitchen of my penthouse before you went to the elevator. What was in your head during those 30 seconds?" "What about it?" "I didn't know," he said. "That's what I mean. I thought I knew what you were thinking that night. I had a version of it in my head that I'd been carrying for months. Then I read what was actually in your head, and it was completely different, bigger, more organized." He paused. "You were already building the next thing, 30 seconds after walking out of a bedroom that—" He stopped, started again. "You were already thinking about what came next." "I'm always thinking about what comes next," she said. "That's not a quality, it's just how I'm built." "I know," he said. "I didn't understand it was a strength until I read the chapter." She looked at the garden, at Amaya, who had decided that the wall was satisfactorily conquered and was now attempting the descent, which involved a great deal of careful deliberation about where to put her feet. "The book helped people," Imani said. "That's what mattered." "I know that's what mattered to you," he said. "I'm telling you it also mattered to me, because I needed to understand what I had been looking at for 3 years without actually seeing." She picked up her tea. She didn't respond to that directly. She had learned in the past 2 years that some things Tae-jun said were not requests for response. They were statements he needed to make for his own accounting, and the appropriate thing was to receive them without deflection and without engagement, because engagement suggested a possibility of repair that she was not offering. She was not repairing this. She was building something different on adjacent ground. Amaya completed her descent, successfully, if not gracefully, and immediately turned and pointed up at the wall and looked at Tae-jun with an expression that clearly communicated the expectation of acknowledgement. "I saw," he said, in English for Imani's benefit. "You did it." Amaya, apparently satisfied, went back to her stones. He watched her. "She's going to be exhausting," he said. "She already is," Imani said. "The best kind." "Yes." Amaya held up a stone and inspected it with extreme seriousness and then placed it in a specific location with the decisiveness of someone who has had a plan all along and is now executing it. The logic of the plan was unknowable to the adults watching. It was clearly a plan. "She has your focus," Tae-jun said. "She has her own focus," Imani said. "She hasn't had time to get it from anyone yet." He considered this. Fair. The light in the garden was doing what October light does in Seattle, going golden and sideways, making ordinary things look more considered than they are. The bare patches in the garden beds where Imani had done her first round of clearing were visible alongside the things she had planted. Not much yet, not the garden it would eventually be, but something. Evidence of intention, the beginning of a plan executed over time. "I'm going to be here," Tae-jun said. "Not to Amaya this time, to Imani. For her. Whatever that looks like, whatever structure you need it to have." He held the teacup in both hands. "I'm not asking for anything different than what's already arranged. I'm just telling you so you hear it directly. Not through Graham, not through the coordinator. From me." "I hear it," she said. "Okay." "I've always believed you'd show up for her," Imani said. "That was never the question." "I know," he said. "The question was whether I could show up as something other than a man who thought love gave him the right to control the people he loved." She looked at him. "I'm working on that," he said. "Not defensively. As information." "I know you are," she said. "I can see it." He looked slightly surprised by that. Not the statement, but the directness of it. The fact that she had seen something in him worth acknowledging and had said so without wrapping it in qualification. She was allowed to see things in him. Seeing them didn't cost her anything. "The legitimate companies," she said. "How are they structured?" He looked at her, adjusting to the topic shift with the speed of someone who is paying close attention. "Independent board. I have no operational role. I receive a board report quarterly and have no voting rights for another 18 months per the terms." "What will you do?" He was quiet for a moment. "Minjai has been running a small logistics consulting firm. Legitimate. He's asked me to come in as an advisor when the restriction period ends." He paused. "Small. Very small compared to—" He stopped. "Compared to what it was. But that's the point." "Good," she said. "You think it's the right move?" "I think it's the only kind of move that makes sense," she said. "For you, for what Amaya will see as she grows up and starts asking questions about who her father is." He looked at Amaya, who had abandoned the stones and was now examining a particular section of garden bed with the intensity of a scientist who has found something worth studying. "What will you tell her?" he said. "When she asks." Imani thought about it honestly, the way she had been thinking about it honestly for 22 months. The truth. At whatever level of detail is appropriate for her age, she'll ask simple questions first, then harder ones as she gets older. She paused. "I'll tell her that her father built something powerful and lost his way inside it, that he hurt people, including me. That when he finally understood what he'd done, he chose to dismantle what he'd built rather than protect it. That it cost him a significant amount of time with her." She looked at the garden. "And that in the time since then, he has shown up every single time he was supposed to." Tae-jun was very still. "That's more than I expected you to give her," he said. "It's the truth," Imani said. "I'm not going to give her a simplified version. She deserves the full picture when she's ready for it. Even the parts that make me look, the full picture includes the parts that explain why you made the choices you made," Imani said. "Not to excuse them, to make them comprehensible. There's a difference." She looked at him. "I wrote a book about the difference between control and love. I'm not going to teach my daughter a simplified version of the same lesson." He nodded. Something in his posture, already quieter than it used to be, already less constructed, settled further, like a man finding the floor. "Thank you," he said. The words were insufficient, and he knew it, and he said them anyway, which was the right thing to do. She picked up both empty teacups and stood. She'll want a snack in about 15 minutes. She'll tell you very clearly when she's ready. Don't worry about anticipating it. Understood. Imani went inside. She washed the cups at the sink with its good light and watched through the window without meaning to. Amaya crossing the garden toward Tae-jun with something in her hand, a rock or a leaf or whatever she had discovered in the garden bed, holding it out with the open-handed generosity of small children who understand instinctively that the best things are made better by sharing them. Tae-jun took it. He examined it with the full seriousness it deserved. He said something. Amaya said something back, incomplete language, half words and half intention, and he nodded like it made complete sense. It probably did. The last thing that needed closing was Sarah. Not dramatically, not a meeting or a resolution or anything that tied a bow on something that was genuinely not the kind of thing that bows fit. Sarah had been in federal protection for 18 months and then in a new city. She had told her attorney she was going somewhere in the Midwest. She hadn't specified where, and Imani hadn't asked. And the legal proceedings had concluded and the contact had mostly ceased, and what remained was the unfinished interior accounting that Imani had been working through in pieces. She wrote Sarah a letter. Not a long one. She was not going to construct a narrative of forgiveness or write something designed to make either of them feel resolved about something that was not fully resolvable. She just wrote what was true. That she understood the coercion Sarah had been under. That understanding it did not make the wound disappear but had changed the nature of it. That she hoped Sarah and her sister and her nieces were safe. That the words in the bedroom, the studied, deliberate, Sang-wook-authored words designed to target the specific geography of Imani's self-doubt, had not, in the end, taken root. That she was not diminished. That the work she had always done, the literacy foundation, the book, the slow construction of a life that was hers on every level, had turned out to be exactly the kind of work that compounds, that travels, that reaches past the person who made it and finds other people inside it. She wrote, "I don't need you to carry guilt about me. I need you to know that what they weaponized about me turned out to be the thing they couldn't actually take." She sealed the letter and gave it to Graham to forward through the appropriate channels, and she didn't wait to hear back because she had not written it to get a response. She had written it because it was true and needed to be said, and she was a person who said true things that needed to be said, and that was not something anyone had given her and not something anyone had been able to take. 4 years after the night. Imani came back for her phone. Imani Brooks Kang was 4 years old and in possession of strong opinions about the garden. Specifically about the low stone wall, which she had been climbing since she was 19 months old, and which she now approached with the easy confidence of someone for whom a challenge has become a competence. She still climbed it on most of Tae-jun's visits, not because she needed to prove anything anymore, because it was her wall, her garden, her thing, and she liked doing it with the people she loved watching. She also liked to narrate it. This was new. She had language now, is real language, full sentences, the particular conversational volubility of a 4-year-old who has discovered that words are extremely powerful and that adults will pay attention to you almost indefinitely if you keep talking. She talked throughout the climb. She talked about the wall and the garden, and something that had happened at her preschool involving a misunderstanding about whose snack was whose. Tae-jun listened with complete attention. He asked questions. He had become, in the years since his release, the kind of father that Imani had not fully anticipated, not because she had expected him to fail, but because the specific quality of it surprised her. He was patient in the deep sense, the structural sense, the kind of patience that is not the absence of impatience, but the active choice to be fully present. He had learned it somewhere in 22 months of scheduled calls and children's books, and the long, specific work of becoming a version of himself that was built for something other than power. Imani was sitting on the back step with a cup of coffee. Coffee again, fully, no more pregnancy modifications, watching. Amaya reached the top of the wall and raised both arms. Tae-jun laughed. Imani laughed. Amaya looked between them with the satisfaction of someone who has created exactly the effect she intended. Then she looked down at the descent, and her face shifted into the focused, methodical expression she made when she was solving a problem. She moved her right foot to the edge, tested the surface, repositioned, tested again. Tae-jun moved fractionally closer, not touching, not intervening, present. Imani held her coffee and stayed where she was. Amaya slipped. A small slip, her foot sliding on the stone, her weight going sideways, a sharp intake of breath from all three of them. And then she found it again. Her hands gripped the wall, her weight redistributed, and she steadied. Tae-jun's hands were raised and then lowering, unused. Amaya looked at him. He looked back. She nodded once, a gesture she had not learned from either of them, just a thing she did, her own language, and completed the descent. Landed both feet on the ground, stood up straight. Then she walked directly to Imani and climbed into her lap and said, "I did it." "I saw," Imani said. "I slipped. I saw that too. But I didn't fall." "No," Imani said, "you didn't." Amaya considered this for a moment, working through the distinction between slipping and falling with the seriousness it apparently deserved. Then she nodded again and got up and went back to the garden. Tae-jun came and sat on the step beside Imani. Not close. The appropriate distance of two people who have negotiated a new geometry for their proximity and are both willing to honor it. They watched Amaya move through the garden with her focused, purposeful stride. "She's going to be something," Tae-jun said. "She already is something," Imani said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's going to ask harder questions soon. About me. About why things are the way they are." "I know." "Are you—" He stopped. "Are you prepared for that?" "Are you?" she said. He looked at the garden, at his daughter crouching to examine something in the dirt. "I've been trying to be. For 3 years I've been trying to be the answer to that question instead of just planning what I'm going to say." A pause. "I don't know if I'm there yet, but I'm trying in a way I couldn't have tried before." "That's the right approach," she said, "because she'll see through anything else." "Because she's already seen everything," Imani said. "She's been watching both of us since she could focus her eyes. She's been taking notes." He looked at Amaya. Something moved across his face. The specific tender terror of a parent who understands that their child is already assembling a version of them from available evidence, and that the evidence is the work, not the intention. "Then I need to keep doing the work," he said. "Yes," she said, "you do." They were quiet for a while. The garden held the late afternoon light the way it had learned to hold it over 4 years of being paid attention to. The bed's fuller now, things growing in the places Imani had cleared and planted with the intention of someone building for the long term. The low stone wall, dark gray and solid, at the garden's edge. Nothing between them had been restored. She was not interested in restoration. Restoration would mean returning to the shape of what they had been. And that shape had been built on foundations she had not been permitted to see and could not trust even if she wanted to. What they had instead was something that had been built from scratch, in plain sight, with documented terms and structured boundaries, and the accumulated evidence of kept promises. It was not romantic. It was not what she had thought she was building when she married him. But it was hers in every part, negotiated on her terms, functional in the ways that mattered for the small person moving through the garden, with her rock collection and her wall and her absolute certainty about what she wanted. That was the thing she had learned. Not the lesson of the book. The book's lesson was for the people who read it. This one was hers alone. You cannot build a real life in a space that belongs to someone else. Even if they love you. Even if the space is beautiful. Even if leaving it costs you more than you thought you had. You build it yourself. From the ground. With your own materials, in your own light, according to your own design. And then you fill it with things that grow. Amaya held up a stone and examined it against the sky. She was deciding something. Imani could see it. The focused deliberation, the weight of the stone in her palm, the process of a small person determining whether a thing has value and where it belongs. Then she put it in her pocket, decided. The garden light went golden and then softer, and the afternoon moved toward evening, and Imani finished her coffee and watched her daughter move through the world she had built for her, making it her own, and felt not happy exactly, not the simple, uncomplicated happiness of someone for whom things have worked out, because things had not simply worked out. Things had been fought for and documented and grieved and rebuilt, slowly and imperfectly, and without any guarantee, but something more honest than happy. Something like being exactly where you are, in a life that is yours, that you chose and built and have not finished building, with a daughter who is already more than anyone gave her credit for before she arrived. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. The light held. And then gently, the way things that are finished finally let themselves be finished, it began to fade.